Hello again, friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim
Wait a minute.
Cornette.
They're not our friends anymore?
Do I have to reinforce that every time?
Well, you know what Gary Hart always told me? Repetition is the key.
He also called popcorn corn.
Would you like some corn, brother?
Well, anyway, welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru. To all of our friends and enemies out there who listen each and every week, I am your host, the great Brian Last. My pleasure to be with you once again. And we will have your questions answered by the leader of the cult of Cornette, the exalted one of Louisville, Kentucky, Mr. Jim Cornette. And here he is right now.
Well, thank you, Brian Last, the great Brian Last, for that thrilling and scintillating introduction. I appreciate it. Even though this is your program, you brought me in as an equal. You elevated me there. You brought me up to your level. I appreciate that. So what do you got?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. And we don't just have questions. We also have a watch along.
I'll raise your appreciation and add some gratitude then. How's about that?
That is just lovely. But as I was saying, what?
Well, it's going to be a good day on the program. We got a lot of positive energy here. We got a lot of cheerfulness. We're going to be happy. We're not going to be grumpy. We're not going to be grumpy like people are. Like, there's a lot of grumpy people on Twitter lately. Possibly grumpy people that have heard one of our programs and not liked the content of same. Possibly grumpy. They may have been up late at night, having a little bit of the bubbly. And Brian, let me ask you a question. When you delete a tweet, does that generally indicate that the response to aforesaid tweet was not of the vein that you were hoping it would be?
Well, I don't know if it necessarily would reflect a response, but it certainly reflects that you may regret that you tweeted it out.
Well, the only reason you'd regret you tweeted it out is when a bunch of people hopped in and say, you know what, he's right, and things and such of that nature. And going against your statement or your meaning or your attempt at somehow gaining some ground back, or just you're venting your frustration because someone told the truth. One of those things. Should we tell the people what we're referring to?
I think so. I think a lot of people may have figured it out. A lot of people may have noticed this before it was deleted.
Well, I did retweet a screenshot that one of the Cult of Cornette members was good enough to send me, so it's out there if you want to find it. But basically what has happened is, on the experience this past week, the highly popular, wildly successful Jim Cornette experience, we reviewed, as we usually do, some of the recent television offerings from some of these so-called wrestling promotions these days, and one of them was the fact that, as a member of Twitter did comment on, Chris Jericho's 30th anniversary television celebration match was against a fat, pale, 50-plus-year-old man that hadn't wrestled to anybody's knowledge in 20 or 25 years, but they're friends. And we reviewed the match, and hours after, apparently it must have been late that night, because I was off of Twitter, because I go downstairs after a nice hard day's work here in the Cornette's Collectibles Mines, and I've shut off the outside world. So late that night, hours after the experience aired, and we gave these comments and opinions, Chris Jericho tweeted, well, Cornette's knocking my matches again, but it's okay because AEW is wildly popular and I'm entertaining the masses, but if Jim would just get his head out of his ass, we'd probably offer him a consultant's job. That was basically the gist of the tweet, wasn't it?
It was basically that he is extremely proud of his shitty work over the year so far, over 2020, and if you would just pipe down for a little while, you'd probably get paid for it.
So here's the brabbery, attempted brabbery now is added to the shenanigans of is that not basically saying If you just stop telling the truth, we'll pay you. For one thing, I know he was pissed because I criticized a match he had with his friend. And it's wonderful they're friends. I mentioned that I have plenty of friends that I wouldn't book in wrestling matches. John Fell in Baltimore came to mind. So he's mad because I criticized his match, but that is in effect proving my point. If I will shut up telling the truth, they will pay me. Apparently, that's the line of when you got the billionaire backer, I guess that's what you do. And that might account for some other people that we'll talk about shortly that join the conversation. But what's a boy to do, Brian? They cannot either. It's, he's just doing this as a gimmick because he wants views and hits and listens. We did the math and we did the shows and we proved that I'm bringing a couple 100,000 people to their program just to see if it's really as rotten as we say it is. And then they report back that indeed we were telling the truth.
And if we were just doing things just for hits and listens and downloads, we would be doing Raw every week. Period.
Yes.
Because there's no comparison with how popular those segments are to AEW.
But here's the problem with that. Besides the fact that's another rotten wrestling show that I don't want to watch because Raw is rotten. No doubt about that. For all the people who say, well, he takes up for the WWE, I'd like to know when. Except for their production crew. But besides the fact that Raw is rotten, Raw didn't come out a couple of years ago and make all these big announcements about how they were going to have this great revolutionary new sports-based wrestling show, bringing statistics and analytics into the presentation with a sports-based fucking outlook on things. And it was going to be just the greatest thing since fucking grandma got those fucking false teeth so she could eat corn again. They didn't do that, so we're not fucking holding that against them. We are watching the program that said they were going to be revolutionary and the greatest thing since grandma's fucking teeth. And she, you know what? She's still gumming the hell out of that corn. They either have to say it's a gimmick, he's just doing this, he doesn't really believe this, because it makes them, not only it makes them feel better, but also it does some damage control, spin control, I think the politicians call it. Because it makes the fans that buy the rest of their shit will buy that. And that's what Cornette really doesn't believe this because they're great. He just says that. That's their damage control. Or they have to, he's bitter. He's angling for a job, or he's bitter they wouldn't give him a job. That horse left the barn a long time ago. Once again, I have to tread somewhat lightly because we know, Brian, from late night phone calls to and from Stephen P. New that they're touchy about that non-disclosure agreement that I signed with them. About how long they been on TNT now? A year, about 2 years ago is when that was signed because they've been on television for a year.
They're very sensitive about that. They're very sensitive. I don't know what they're afraid of you revealing. I mean, that's the other.
Well, no, there ain't nothing else to reveal.
What is Tony Khan afraid that you'll say that he told you? I think the listeners would love to know. I wish they would release you from the non-disclosure agreement.
There's nothing else to reveal because then I'd have to remember all the other shit that he was blathering at me that I was like, Here's the thing. I've never said they were not going to do this. It was entirely plausible that a family that owns a professional football team and professional sports leagues in other countries and stadiums and arenas and things like that would be, as the story I believe has been told by Mr. Khan himself, at a party with Kevin Riley and the Turner Networks, and boom, and it was a surprise. I think has been told also to the new Turner executives that they actually had Vince McMahon's competition 20 years before that. Nobody there really knew that because wrestling wasn't on their mind at the time. But anyway,
they don't even know who Ted Turner is.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it was a Turner. When was it? Anyway, I never said he couldn't get the show on the air. And I never said that he didn't have the money to back the thing, blah, blah, blah. So where I differed in his presentation was when I believe, as I've said, and I'm not revealing anything here, when he told me who he was going to be in business with. And that's when I knew that this was not something that I was going to be involved with because I knew what it was going to look like. And I'm pissed that they proved me right. That's why I'm pissed about AEW. As I've said this before, but maybe it bears repeating, and I haven't said it for about a year now, so we've got a bigger audience. It pissed me off that instead of taking the ability to talk to a fucking guy at Turner Networks and just get a network cable show, and the financing that nobody else has to sign, seemingly, one would think, any professional wrestler in the world that's not signed to the WWE might be available to somebody with that bankroll if they knew how to do things. And all of those assets were going to be used in a shit show because of who was involved and who their friends were going to be that they were going to hire and the style of presentation that it was going to be done as it proved me wrong, right? That's why I'm pissed, because they haven't. You could have taken that, as I said, all those assets, and you could have got wrestlers, and you could have presented a product such as Ring of Honor has presented, or certainly something more respectable to professional wrestling than what we have gotten with the All Friends Wrestling Alliance. And that's why I'm pissed. It's a wasted opportunity. In this generation, in many of our lifetimes, nobody's ever going to just be able to talk to a guy at Turner Network and get a show on the air again and have the money to do all these things, especially through a pandemic, and do a worse job at it. No, nobody's ever going to have this opportunity again, and they're fumbling the fucking ball because they hired the friends, relatives, acquaintances, and paramours of the Central Goof Patrol that he's got as his brain trust. And so that's why I'm pissed at them. It's not that I didn't want, that's about my first comment to Tony Khan. The first time I ever spoke to him on the phone was, Tony, I'm the only one that'll tell you the truth because I don't want a job. 2 years ago, I was 57. Now I'm 59. That's almost 60. I was not going to be definitely getting on airplanes and flying around or driving around to a wrestling promotion, events that were being held all over the country, regardless of who it was fucking for. Not interested in that. Am I going to stay home and write my thoughts down via email or phone them in and take a check for it? Well, if it was a goddamn real promotion, Pinocchio, absolutely. If there was a way I could help, but how the fuck? You couldn't do anything with this show that they're doing if you were on the fucking ground there, unless the first thing was fire half the fucking roster and start over. So sending thoughts in on a show like this when those people are on the scene, it's like telling somebody over the phone how to cook a cheeseburger. You don't get to stand there and watch. You don't get to smell it. You don't get to take a bite of it when it's done. And they're probably not going to do it right to begin with. So they're just sending you money to send them shit that they're going to ball up and fucking toss away. And I don't want money like that, because then I feel like I'm wasting my time. So there was never going to be any goddamn arrangement here. Especially, as I've mentioned, after I saw their first fucking program.
But if you had wanted it, it would have been there. That's another key point.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that, but the point is everybody thinks they have their own reasons. They can't imagine somebody just out here just telling the truth because I don't give a fuck, and I'm tired of people wiping their fucking feet on the wrestling business. And I praise the people who respect it and who approach their profession in a serious way and who have talent and who are doing their best to get over. And I shit on the people who are goddamn jokes and imbeciles and wink, wink, nudge, nudge wrestlers and cosplayers and have matches with inanimate objects and the Invisible Man, because that's the way I really fucking feel. And the problem with everybody's fucking trying to figure out why is Cornette doing this is they cannot accept, they can't start with the fact that, yes, we do suck. And yes, this does suck. And whether 100,000 people watch it or 1 million people watch it or 10 million people watch it, that's not even what he's talking about. He's just telling us we suck. And that can't be true. So he's got to have an ulterior motive. I got news for you, simpletons. Start thinking simpler. And I'm sorry, Chris, that I didn't like your match with your friend. I would have booked it in Smoky Mountain Wrestling because it meant something to you. I would have put it on OVW TV because that's local television and a wrestling school. But to put that fucking guy on national cable on a new promotion that's supposed to be in competition with the WWE just because he's your fucking friend, that's irresponsible. Fiduciarily irresponsible. Fiscally irresponsible. Physically irresponsible. He got so blown up, he could have fucking killed poor. Did you see him try to do the old Dick Murdoch thing where he comes off the top with a knee in the guy's back and rides him down? He was beside Chris because he knew he'd fucking kill him if he fell on him because he was so blowed up and sucking wind so bad. So he just came down next to him and Chris had to kind of face smash his own self. But the point is, I do apologize if I hurt Chris's feelings. But everybody that thinks that I want a fucking check or a job to shut up, that ain't going to happen. For everybody that thinks I don't really think this and I'm working a gimmick, you really do suck that bad. And listen, what's for all the rest of those people? Basically, just fucking deal with it. Goddamn. A lot of people have said bad shit about shit that I've done on fucking television. In their case, they were wrong. However, you know, it's their opinion. But mine is mine.
It was a little revealing, too, in that tweet that Chris has since deleted. That it was basically, if you just put your head down and shut up, we'll pay you. If you just sell out everything you believe in for a little while, like some other people may have done, we'll pay you. Which I think says a lot about Chris's attitude with AEW. Because for years it was, I'll never work against Vince. I'll never work for anyone but Vince. Wait, how much will you pay me? How much? Oh, shit. Vince who? Who's Vince? I hate Vince. Give me that money. Give me that bubbly.
Well, but don't put it all on Chris, because there's a number of people that are taking that money. Does anybody, goddamn, one time somebody said to me, well, I get bored sitting at home. How? I've been sitting at home for 6 months. I'm almost ready to have a nervous fucking breakdown because I got all kinds of shit to do. And if I didn't have all kinds of this shit to do, I'd have plenty more shit to do that I'm not doing right now. And also, as you mentioned, the payoff aspect. I have been reticent to believe, to lend credence to validate the theory that they're paying poor Uncle Dave Meltzer. That a lot of the fans say, well, Dave's on AEW's payroll. And I've been inclined to think that whatever has caused him to lose his mind and not only like this shit, but he defends Marco Stunt. He defends everything. The second least good match on the show was so-and-so. He'll find a way to buffer that blow no matter what. But I didn't believe they were actually paying him. I think they may be paying him. And I'll tell you why. Either that or he is just so pissed off at me for not being his friend anymore because I could not understand why he had lost his mind or why he had lost his principles or why he had lost his prescription for antipsychotic medication or whatever the fuck has caused him to just just slobber over them. And it's even though that he hated rotten wrestling in the WWF that drew 10 times as much money and he would pick it apart granularly, he it's just, I thought it was just he wanted to be one of the cool kids, and he's having the midlife or late life crisis. Well, he had to be late life crisis. If this was a midlife crisis for him, he'd lived to be 120. But now I think it must be because it's over and above now. I think I don't think it's because he's mad at me, because a grown man would leave it alone. And I don't think that it's just that he loves them so much. I think he is getting paid to do this, and there's something expected of him, because he jumped in on this conversation after Jericho had tweeted that to me. And before the next day, when I knew anything about it, he had already hopped in pretty instantly. Don't dare give him a consultant's job. Oh, no. If it was 20 years ago, great. But now, no, you should hire Mike Tenay. Instead, what the fuck? He said they should give Mike Tenay the consultant's job. And I'm not laughing because Mike Tenay would be a great consultant. I'm laughing because Mike Tenay and Dave Meltzer have been friends for ages. Brian, you know this, right? For 40 years.
Going back to the 70s, yeah.
I have also known Mike Tenay for a while, and I had conversations every TNA television taping that was held. I had long conversations with Mike Tenay for a 3-year period. And the reason I'm laughing is because from every conversation that I ever had with Mike Tenay, not only has he had nothing to do with wrestling in the past several years, and from what I understand, doesn't want any more to do with it than what I do, but he would feel the exact same way and express the same sentiments that I express, just in a much more polite and less profane manner. So, but Dave, in a conversation that is not even about him, that he was not even included in, tagged in, featured in, that didn't reference him. Our show did not reference him when we were talking about Jericho's match. Jericho's tweet did not reference anything he said. He just jumped in on it to knock me and suggest that they give a friend of his a job. So now the dynamic dude, Dave Meltzer, is now his official title because he's so young. I want to see him coming out with a skateboard. Can you see that? The next time
that's ridiculous
that fans are allowed in the building, here comes the dynamic dude, Dave Meltzer, fellow kids, and he comes out on a skateboard. Somebody out there in the cult is going to put that motherfucker on a skateboard and on video. I know it. I wasn't talking about Dave Meltzer. He's got to hop in on me again because either I'm chapping his fucking lips and burning his fucking crotch without saying a word about him, that he has to jump in whenever somebody else says something he's not involved in, just to make sure that everybody knows that I'm wrong about AEW. I'm thinking he must be this must be a prerequisite of his position as their PR agent. I love that alliteration. That he's got to, no matter whether he's involved in the conversation or not, if somebody's knocking AEW, he's got to fucking come down on him. And or, as we know, block him on Twitter. I block a lot of people on Twitter, but he blocks everybody on Twitter that says anything bad about AEW. I don't block everybody on Twitter that says something good about AEW. I just block people that say something smart ass to me. And then their ass gets blocked. And I don't care. What do you think the dynamic dude's issue is with this? Right? Does he wants to get Mike Tenay a job, or he wants to get even with me, or he wants Jericho and Tony Khan to know that he's keeping up his part of the bargain? Why was he involved in that whole exchange?
I can't explain that. I will say, obviously, I've said it before, you and I have very different thoughts about Dave right now. With that said, I completely understand where you're coming from with this stuff, and Dave has, as I've said before, gone out of his way for well over a year to take shots at you, even when he's not a part of the conversation. Is he being paid by AEW and Tony Khan? I would like to think he's not. And I'm going to hold that until I see evidence otherwise. Do I think he has consulted Tony Khan and people in AEW on what they should do? Yes, I firmly do. I would like to know. I mean, knowing that Tony had various people sign NDAs, did Dave sign an NDA with Tony Khan or Base 10? before AEW was developed. I think that maybe is important to know. I think it's beyond just the AEW issue. And I think Dave sometimes conflates his Cornette arguments with what he believes and what he reports. And we've always said there are two different things there. If it's Jim said they'll be out of business by April and they weren't, that's a fair thing to say. But to use that as an overall thing and then go back to opinions and say,
and I came back and said, you know what? I'm sorry, mea culpa. I didn't realize that the standards of viewership had fallen to the point that they have where they would keep a fucking program on from 8 to 10 p.m. in prime time. It's not doing 1 million viewers. I apologize for not keeping up with television over the last few years since I haven't given a fuck.
But this is the style of wrestling Dave likes and Dave has championed for years. Not just the individual people. Obviously, he's a big Young Bucks booster. Obviously, he likes Kenny Omega a lot. But this style of wrestling, and, if you've ever seen Dave in a crowd without his notepad, because, obviously he takes notes during matches a lot, the fans of AEW react the same way Dave would to the various high spots and the various things happening. But I think the constant defense of AEW, if someone criticizes anything about what kind of show it is, it's now they're over to that audience. And that's true. To that audience, I assume, we haven't seen a live crowd or a significant crowd in the better part of, actually almost all of 2020. Since March. But that crowd seemed to react to the things that AEW pushes. The Orange Cassidys, the Marco Stunts, the Luchasauruses, etc., etc., etc. But the argument that this is as good as it can be, as good as it can get, that there's nothing to learn from any of the principles that have worked in the past, that because Cornette wasn't wildly successful with Ring of Honor, that means he should be dismissed in anything he has to ever say again about young people in professional wrestling, is idiotic. I'm sorry, it is. And you could talk to people who worked in MLW. You could talk to people who have been around Jim in various different places where he has helped out.
Don't speak to me in the third person.
I think to a man, everyone who you've worked with will say that you were really helpful, that you helped them think about things a different way. There are people, look, without naming it, there are people in fucking AEW who talk to Jim. There's a reason.
We had a couple of them on the program, but I haven't talked to them since.
But there are others. There are others. And you know what? There's a reason they ask Jim his thoughts. There's a reason. It's not like the outsiders are the only people who have an issue with the way AEW does things, or want to look at things from a different perspective, or don't necessarily want the Young Bucks giving their input on creative for other people. There are people who don't necessarily believe Tony Khan is a creative genius.
No. Now you've gone too far with that last statement. There are people on earth that do not believe that Tony Khan is a creative genius. And that's not, that's not even a knock on Tony Khan. Anybody out there, just stop, get a grip on yourself, drink a bowl of Valium soup, and think about this. You really enjoy something, whether it's a movie or a television show or a sport or an endeavor of any description, and you read about it, and you watch it, and you go to see it live, if that's a thing you can do with this thing, you experience it in some kind of way, and then suddenly you decide, I'm going to start the second biggest blah blah company in the fucking country and run it myself. I've never done this before at any level, but I'm going to do this. And I'm going to get as my central core of advisors and executive vice presidents, except Cody, who have never done any of this at a high level, or in some cases any level, depending on whether it's them, their relatives, or their fucking friends. And we're all going to do it together. I'm glad that's not, he didn't buy a fucking airplane goddamn factory. I can see those things dropping from the sky. You don't just come in and do this at this level and expect to not have a shit show, which is what they've got going on, whether they want to admit it or not. And whether Dave wants to admit it or not, because not only is there a lack of experience, there's also a lack of respect for what this actually is. Because a lot of these guys think that they're too fucking cute to do that wrestling stuff. And they're being innovative and revolutionary and breakthrough in their entertainment, and they can all kiss my big fat white fucking ass. So that's my thoughts on that.
You know, that's the thing, too. I've watched AEW with people who aren't wrestling fans or used to be wrestling fans. And the reaction is never, I need to watch more of this. And I'm not, and for anyone who thinks I'm saying, oh, well, WWE's great. No, WWE sucks, too.
Yeah.
The point is,
they missed that part. They missed that part. That's why we wanted this to be good.
That's right.
And that's why, and a lot of people wanted it to be good so bad that they're convincing themselves it's good when it ain't fucking good. But it's the same people that wanted so badly to believe that it was good. And they ain't. There are no new people here. There aren't any new people for NXT. There's less people for Raw and SmackDown. We see where this is going. When numbers diminish, it's generally the wrong direction, unless you're talking about COVID cases. And numbers have diminished from the shit show that everybody's been putting on in the name of professional wrestling for the last fucking 20 years. But I'm the crazy one.
Every single time you fantasy booked something on this show for AEW, it's been better than what AEW did. And I know that's my opinion.
But be fair, that's also faint praise.
Faint.
Faint.
But yeah, I mean, the idea that you should just be blindly ignored because you missed the boat on the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. Because you can't admit that AEW is a wild success, which, again, I wouldn't admit that either. It's been successful because it's still alive. But to look at AEW and think this is as good as it could be, this is as good as the business could be, that's wrong. That's wrong. And I've said this a long time ago on the show. I've made a lot of money in my life for my ability to identify ways to increase business for businesses. I don't look at AEW and think, wow, this is great. This is as good as it can get. It's as good as it could be for that audience, which is a very fickle audience, in case you haven't noticed. But Jesus Christ, go watch The Best Friends with someone who's not a wrestling fan. Go watch Luchasaurus and Marco Stunt with someone who's not a wrestling fan. There's a reason the business doesn't grow anymore. There's a reason we can't get young people to care about the business anymore. There is a reason there aren't large amounts of fans discovering wrestling and getting into wrestling anymore.
There's certainly a reason why the girls don't fucking like to watch the goddamn guys anymore.
But you see, Dave's actually gotten on...
Well, no, wait, for a number of reasons. The guys are too busy playing video games, try to get laid, and if you do get laid, you might get sued. Then the fucking girls are penalized too now. They can't get laid either.
That's one of the things Dave has recently jumped on you about, that you said that there are no female viewers, and you couldn't be more wrong because the Nielsen ratings show that, and I don't have it in front of me, so I may be slightly wrong here, that I believe there are more teenage girls watching each week, and that the overall female audience for AEW based on the Nielsen ratings has gone up.
When AEW ran live events with fans, what percentage of that audience was teenage girls?
Not much that I saw.
Okay. There you go. And I'm not talking about who's watching at home. I'm talking about who's really into this shit. And I guarantee you, when we had 12,000 people in the Myriad in Oklahoma City in the days of the Rock and Roll Express, 7,000 of them were women under the age of 35. For heaven's sake. Good God. And also old men, old women, young babies in arms, cab drivers and attorneys.
And again, I think a lot of this, and obviously it's gotten personal with you and Dave. And
no, it's just got personal with Dave because I try to mostly ignore him anymore, except when he says something completely insane.
But I think beyond, I know you think he's being paid by AEW. I'm not willing to put money on that on my bookie yet. But I think the other thing is this is what Dave likes. The Young Bucks style of match is a match that Dave likes. Dave enjoys the Young Bucks YouTube show, which is the worst bad comedy. I tried to watch it. It's awful. Dave likes it. I mean, that's where there's a disconnect between the quality of wrestling you like and, expect out of professional wrestling and what he actually enjoys. And obviously you can enjoy a whole wide range of things from a serious match with Minoru Suzuki in Japan to the silliness that happens on AEW. Dave really likes what they are doing. And for anyone, and I just want to say one other thing. For anyone who gets upset about Dave's star ratings, don't. He's just saying what he thinks about that match. If he gives a match 4.5 stars, he enjoyed that match to the level of 4.5 stars. That doesn't mean it's in cement. That doesn't mean that that's what it is. That means that's what he liked. You can have your own star rating. The people are losing their minds over that.
People taking him seriously when this was 6 stars. And, that means it's the greatest match of all time. No, it means it's the greatest match that Dave Meltzer ever saw involving Kenny Olivier and a bunch of fucking dives, and it went at least 45 minutes. But people take it seriously. And when he gave that fucking hokey fucking street fight where they almost killed each other, and then the fucking goof came out of the trunk, a better rating than Finn Balor and Kyle O'Reilly, 2 trained athletes about killing themselves in the proper way inside the ring as a fucking competitive sport. But the fucking thing with the middle card comedy tag team and the fucking guy with his hands in his pockets coming out of the trunk was, in Meltzer's mind, much higher quality than that. It's just, now that I've said it, I think he lost his prescription. I think if he get back on his meds.
That's ridiculous. Come on.
Because I just went a couple of days this past week without my blood pressure medicine, had to call in a renewal and get through all that shit and everything. It was a few days. I was feeling a little off kilter. If Dave has not had his fucking Prozac and his fucking Metamucil and his goddamn, Uncle Ben's converted rice or whatever he takes to keep him regular, maybe that's the cause of it. I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this, without you slandering him anymore, like you just did.
What was that slander? That's an awful sharp word to be bandying about here.
Do you think that too many wrestlers work towards what they anticipate the star rating would be? Do you think you know what I'm saying? Are there guys who, when they have a match, they're working towards, whether they realize it or not, what Dave Meltzer would like because of the star rating? Because when that Observer comes out with the star rating, that's what people look to. They don't look towards what, Johnny Dumbfuck thinks about their match. They're looking to see what the Observer gave them for that match, what they got ranked in the Observer. Do you think that a lot of guys are working towards that? Like that's what they pay attention to?
Well, they may not care what Johnny Dumbfuck says, but Putz McGee still carries some weight in this environment. But, it depends is my answer, and then I will flesh that out. In my era and time in the 80s, 90s, in OVW in the 2000s, no, absolutely. It was never even mentioned or brought up or thought of, or at least nobody publicly. And I doubt very seriously that anybody else was thinking about it. In my time in MLW last year, nobody said anything, but that would be such a markish thing to say, especially anybody would say it to me, right? The point I'm making is some of the modern guys, especially on the All Friends Wrestling program, probably do give that some thought and some weight, but I don't know if they would say it out loud, except maybe to each other that they know thinks the same thing. But any other time I would have said, no, that's ridiculous. But now I believe it probably exists. What can I tell you?
All right. I guess that answers the question.
Anyway, if you want to know what I'm doing with my time, ladies and gentlemen, whether I'm not consulting anything, I don't have time, just go to JimCornette.com. And the merchandise update is we're in the weeds, folks. And I sincerely hope that we're going to be caught back up by the end of this week. We're losing a shipping day due to Columbus Day. Yes, that is. And now I found out my bank is even open on Columbus Day. It's just apparently one of those federal holidays where just federal employees and government employees get off.
No mail.
No mail is what I'm saying. So we're losing a shipping day this week. But by the end of this week, we should be caught up to where we're getting about a 5 to 7 day turnaround. But anyway, the face masks are flying, already been reordered. We're going to try to have an uninterrupted supply, but I will mention the new 8x10 signed autographed photos, the face masks, the t-shirts, the burger towels, the behind the curtain graphic novel, the books, the DVDs from $9 to $15, incredible values there. But don't expect to get it overnight, folks. You're dealing directly with me, JimCornette.com, Cornette's Collectibles. Thank you for your support. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to create a panic. I'm far enough in the hole already.
Okay, well,
this is your program.
You know, a lot of people may want to bet.
Who?
There are people out there who may want to bet on what the next match to get 5 or 6 or 7, perhaps even 8 stars will be.
Well, I don't know whether they'll take that bet over at our friends at MyBookie, but they'll take legitimate bets. Ladies and gentlemen, between the NFL, college ball, MLB playoffs, there's games to watch. And with thousands of betting lines available on all your favorite sports and events, you can turn your game day into payday with MyBookie. Whether you like to back the big favorites, consider putting a couple in a parlay for a much bigger payout. I'm glad they write this shit down because I don't know what I'm saying. Not only do parlays make meaningless games exciting, but more importantly, they give you a chance to turn ordinary bets into real money makers. And don't forget the underdogs, folks. They've got a big value. The thing about the NFL, as anybody who watches football, which includes almost everybody but me, knows, underdogs are never really dogs on Sunday. Every team has a chance to win, and you do too. Game spreads, championship futures, player prop bets. It's never too late to get in on whatever the fuck all that is and start turning your sports knowledge into actual cash in your wallet. And when you sign up at MyBookie, use our promo code JCE to claim a deposit match dollar for dollar all the way up to $1,000. That's when you put in $100, they give you another 100. You put in 200, they give you another 200, all the way up to $1,000. You see where I'm going here. Promo code JCE for you to claim that matching deposit. Folks, stacked UFC cards, they take UFC bets. Now we might start talking a little bit because you and I know a thing or two about the bone bending there. Presidential prop bets, all the major sports and more. Sign up today to begin your winning season exclusively at mybookie.ag.
All right. Well, let's get some questions here on the show. Unless there's anyone else you want to rip right now before we
No, I'm in a good mood. I have nothing negative to say about anyone. I'll tell you one other cocksucker, though. No, we are going to, by the way, we haven't mentioned, we're going to do that watch along later today in anticipation of our Jim Cornette experience this coming week with Bertrand Hébert, the co-author of Eighth Wonder of the World, the biography of Andre the Giant. We're going to do a watch-along later today in the program of his most famous, well, one of his most famous Japanese matches with Stan the Lariat Hansen. You're going to see a different side of Andre or hear about one. If you'll see it if you decide to watch along with us, or you can just listen and not really get in the spirit of things like some asshole, I guess. Anyway, what do you got?
Well, you know, previously I said when Bertrand was on 605 that I think that Andre the Giant biography, Eighth Wonder of the World, may be the single best wrestling biography ever written. What did you think compared to other wrestling books you've read?
I got to agree with you, or at least put it in the conversation, because they not only it's a real biography. You know, a lot of times when you read a wrestling biography, it's only just by rote. Here's what he did in chronological order in his entire wrestling career. And oh, by the way, he was married and had 2 kids. This is a biography of Andre, like a presidential biography or a historical figure. You get the personal side, the professional side. They talk to the family. They've got family photographs. We're not even getting paid to sell this book, folks, but it does tell you all about Andre the Giant, the wrestler, and then Andrei Roussimoff, the human being, and so many things that I didn't know about the wrestling business, as big as it was in France in the 60s. And, they've covered the Montreal scene so extensively. A lot of that is in there when Montreal was the North American capital of wrestling for a while. There were those huge crowds they were drawing in the early 70s. So I really liked it. And it's huge. As I've said before, it weighs at least 3 pounds, so it's got to be good. So we're gonna do the watch along later today. You didn't get that in. I had to tell people about that. Let me cross that off.
I remember I tried to say it at the top of the show, but then you ran away with the show.
Well, no, it's your show. I'm just here to
ran away with it.
You.
Give it back.
I did. Well, here, take it.
All right.
Tag. There you go.
Well, before we get to any questions, got some breaking news. This was sent in on Twitter by someone who is a big fan of the show. He's always tweeting stuff. We really appreciate him. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. Furman Torres?
Yes. Furman's been tweeting. I guess that's the way you pronounce it. I mean, it's not like it's goddamn Vladimir Chapikakov or anything where you get it wrong in a lot of places. Furman's been tweeting us and listening for quite some time.
Well, Furman tweeted out to us that apparently, once again, this is the second time, Dexter Lumis has changed his Twitter profile picture to be Travis Heckel's artwork. This time it is you and Dexter in the profile pic. So anyone who goes to Twitter will see the cartoon image of Dexter Lumis with Jim Cornette. Any thoughts on this?
Well, no, I like the guy. I think his gimmick, the gimmick is not working and doing him justice, but I like the guy. And there's some constructive criticism that I've given, and he's got a good sense of humor. And who knows, in this environment, he may very well feel the same way about some of the things I'm saying, but they don't want him to do that. They want him to do this or whatever. So who knows? He could be wanting to break free and take my critiques to heart. But he's enslaved by the evil empire.
Well, in the world of kayfabe, he's kind of a serial killer, I guess, now that I think about it. Who do you think he's threatening here, you or Travis?
Well, I don't think he's threatening anyone. I think he's merely saying that one of these days he'd like to sit down with one of us with a nice bottle of Chianti and potentially eat our fucking livers.
Some fava beans?
Some fava beans.
All right. Well, that was
I just hope he doesn't know where I live.
Thank you, Furman, for sending that in.
Yeah, thanks, Furman, for stirring that up.
Let's start the show off. We've been doing this for 50 minutes.
Start the fucking show. God damn, isn't it time to wind this thing up?
Let's kick the questions off with a couple from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi.
Oh, God damn. It goes from fucking ridiculous to ludicrous. All right, here we go.
Here's a question from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi.
You said it again.
What are your thoughts on the reports that Kevin Steen was the one that recommended Cody reach out to the Young Bucks after he was released from the WWE? How much more do you dislike Steen for making the introduction?
Well, no, actually, I can believe that happened. And that's been one of the bright spots. I mean, say what you want about a few of the things that we have been disturbed that Cody has done. Cody has been a bright spot on that television program. And even you, great Brian Last, with your somewhat anti-Cody bias that you started out with, baby. Who's been more consistent in having good matches or good promos or being serious and getting the proper fucking feeling out of what he's been doing than Cody on AEW?
By and large, his segments are the ones that you could rely on for being the closest to what I would want in professional wrestling. Now, I wish he wouldn't get his wife into every single thing he does.
Yeah, except for that. And Brandy. That's me.
But no, I agree. Look, I have issues with some of Cody's work and some of his promos, but compared to everyone else in AEW, he has just as good a batting average as anyone does.
Yeah, so as far as am I mad because Steen directed Cody to talk to the Bucks? No, that's probably one of the nicest things that anybody's ever done for him. As far as Steen goes, hey, sooner or later, even a blind squirrel will find a nut.
Another question from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi, Jim. Alberto Del Rio was indicted Thursday in San Antonio on charges of aggravated kidnapping. What do you think about Del Rio's troubles with the law? And do you think he has any future in pro wrestling? We did receive similar questions from various other people. Other questions also asked, did you have any experience with him? Were you ever around him? And just any general thoughts about Alberto Del Rio?
Well, for one thing, I would say you don't want to piss a fucking nutcase like that off, but I don't think he's going to be roaming around the United States going after people that have said bad things about him on a podcast in the next 20 to 30 years, so I will feel free to speak my mind. He's a fucking nut. The only time that I've ever met him or been around him was when What Culture, the previous incarnation of What Culture Pro Wrestling, the people that got it started before everything all broke up, right? They brought me and Jim Ross over in 2016 to do the commentary on their internet pay-per-view. And then that's when JR and I did a Inside the Rope show for our friend Kenny McIntosh. Hello, Kenny. At the same time, and then What Culture had done another show that I did commentary on a couple days later with Dave Bradshaw. So we were over there for about a week and did 3 shows. And Del Rio was the main event, or one of the main events in both those shows. And so I met him, and he worded his matches were okay, and he was, professional in the locker room around me. I didn't see anything out of the way, but that was the same time that I'd heard. Remember when he came up with the story that he was outside his restaurant in San Antonio and somebody came up and stabbed him or cut him? Right? And his arm and hand was kind of wrapped up, and because he was wrapped up, this was right after that incident. Do you remember this, Brian Last, or is this something that's gone so unreported for so long that nobody remembers this?
I remember the story loosely. I don't remember specific details.
Okay, well, right before these shows took place, there was a story. It made the newspapers. It was reported on all the wrestling sites that Alberto Del Rio, who was still together with Paige at that time, was attacked on the street in San Antonio, allegedly outside the restaurant that he was owner or co-owner of, and he got cut by some guy. And he was wrapped up in these matches and, favoring his arm a little bit. And since we're in England, I got the fucking story that one of Paige's brothers had flown over here to fucking speak to Mr. Del Rio about his interactions with Paige. And apparently Paige's brother walked a dog on Alberto. And I don't know any more details. There was a fucking knife involved. Who had it first, I don't fucking know. But that's what happened there, is what I heard. I can't swear to this in a court of law. This is hearsay evidence, counselor.
I had heard something similar.
Okay. And everybody know Paige's family are all in the wrestling business, and her brothers, apparently don't like to take a lot of bullshit when their little sister's concerned. So anyway, then you hear, remember for about a year and a half, they were constantly making news, issues in the airport, issues in fucking foreign countries, beat some wrestler up in fucking Mexico for walking past him in the stairway. They got taken. Remember when Alberto Del Rio and his brother got taken to jail for getting in a fight with each other, and they fought in the fucking police station?
Was that like the Netherlands or something?
Germany, possibly?
Yeah, somewhere over there.
Germany, they had to repaint the fucking police station because they got their blood on all the walls of the police station getting in a fight with each other in the police station. And nobody was telling me exactly what his fucking issue was during that whole time, except for whatever reason, every time they would tell a story immediately afterwards, they would quote Dave Chappelle. They go, cocaine's a hell of a drug. I don't know what Dave Chappelle had to do with Alberto Del Rio. And finally, I guess Paige, who was, let's face it, she was making news that if they hadn't come up with that movie, she would have been future endeavored. And apparently she was just under the influence of a fucking nut, because I guess now she's after they've broken up, she didn't make any more news, did she? After she got away from fucking old Albert. So I don't know what's wrong with this fucking guy, but apparently he did not get his shit together at all, because I read the complaint of this shit, and I don't think cocaine is that good of a drug. I don't know what this fucking guy was on when he did the shit that he was alleged to have done in this complaint. But the government needs to keep an eye on him, and they need to send him to fucking federal housing for a while. Did you hear everything that she alleges he did to her over a period of 16 fucking hours? And I'm telling you, folks, whether you're engaging in sexual assault or sexual fucking funnery, it don't last 16 hours without a lot of help. So whatever the fuck he's doing, he needs to quit doing it. You read all that shit, right?
When it first happened a while back, I remember reading all about it. Was it that he threatened to abandon her son, or was it something like that?
Well, no, besides the fact that he said if she said anything, he would fucking drop her son off in the middle of the road somewhere or feed him to a street gang or whatever. But besides that, no, he is alleged to have assaulted, not only choked her out, not only punched her or pummeled her about the head and face for a while, sexually assaulted her with a variety of objects, was the quote, over a period from 10 o'clock at night to 2 o'clock the next afternoon. Nobody gets that mad or that horny if they're in a right frame of mind and not chemically altered. So he's got big issues. This is a guy that has issues for the wrestling business. And imagine most of the people in the wrestling business don't just have issues, they got subscriptions. This guy is at the head of the list right now. I don't see how he will ever. I mean, no, I shouldn't say that. Some goddamn jack off, like they ran the big fucking convention of mud show goofs this past weekend in Indianapolis, because Indiana, Pence being a former governor, you can imagine they've got like 5 times the fucking COVID cases that Kentucky does right next to them. And they don't give a shit whether people die or not up there. But some trash like that, if Del Rio does ever get out of jail or get out of this, they would book him. But no reputable fucking wrestling company ever. I didn't see why he was getting the fucking chances he was getting just when they were making all the news a few years ago, him and Paige. Well, remember when I went to TNA in 2017, it was not only to fire Bruce Pritchard. That was the main part. I think Jeff Jarrett just wanted me to do that on television. He wanted to see it. But it was to explain why that Alberto Del Rio was no longer their world champion, and a new champion was going to be crowned, because they decided to not do any more business with him. And then as soon as fucking Jeff was gone by the next taping, they brought the fucking idiot back, Del Rio, and used him again. So people have been trying to get rid of him for the past couple of years, not bring him in. I don't think his future is looking very rosy. This is really a case of somebody that shouldn't be booked in the fucking wrestling business anymore.
When it comes to the trial, do you think they'll allow Mil Mascaras to wear his mask?
That would be damn fucking hilarious. If they had a courtroom sketch and there was Uncle Mil in the fucking crowd wearing his mask, that would be fucking hilarious. I'd buy
Who
that.
knows? I'd buy that sketch right away.
You never know about these things. Anyway, poor fella.
Adios, Alberto.
Adios, Alberto.
Jim, our next question, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com, is from Booker Teat in Boring, Oregon.
Booker Teat in Boring, Oregon?
That's what it says here. I was curious about a tweet from Batista, who said he used to hide inhalers under the ring. He said, quote, I hid inhalers under the ring and with people working around the ring. I'm not kidding. The cold venues were my nightmare. Does Jim recall this when Batista was in OVW? Also, does Jim know of any other wrestlers who had asthma and had to keep an inhaler close to ringside when they were wrestling?
Well, God, to be honest, I didn't know Batista had asthma. I don't remember him ever telling me that. I know Steve Bradley had asthma, and that's one of the things I think that kept him from going to the main roster, because even though he didn't perform like it, they didn't trust it. Because I remember that he often because he was 6 feet, 230, great shape, doing moonsaults, really athletic, had fast-paced matches. He would fucking, hit the thing after some of his matches. But Batista, he just used to always be cold. That was the thing I couldn't understand. Here's this guy's 6'6" and 325 or 30 pounds at the time and all jacked up. And we'd be sitting it wouldn't be necessarily a cold building. I can understand the old Davis Arena in Jeffersonville had no heat or air. So it was 150 in the summer and 40 in the fucking winter. But just in high school gyms or the church gym locker room, we used to use do the church shows on Tuesday night or whatever. He's got a hoodie. He's got sweatpants on. He's fucking bundled up, and the rest of us are sweating like whores in church, running around giving finishes or whatever. He was always just in the corner, meekly, not calling much attention to himself, and bundled up. And asthma doesn't make you cold. I mean, I can see where if it was a cold atmosphere, that may aggravate your breathing issues. I don't know, but he was sitting there shivering. I don't think asthma makes you shiver. So I don't know. This is news to me. But I never saw him hiding anything under the ring. Chances are, back in those days, if somebody had hidden something under the ring, by the time they got back, it wouldn't have been there anymore. I don't know. I don't know about that one.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, it's a rare thing in wrestling that there aren't many guys that you know of who had asthma or ever had to hide inhalers beyond Batista.
No, I mean, I'm sure, once again, I'm sure that some guys have had asthma, but it wasn't like, I can't remember off the top of my head anybody ever making an issue in the locker room around me back in the days when I was in the locker rooms all the time. Where's my inhaler? Or I'm having an asthma issue or whatever the fuck may be. I don't remember that happening. So, maybe they just had it and boom, and it wasn't a big deal. But let's face it, anybody that would have serious, severe breathing problems of any kind wouldn't be wrestling. As I said, the only time I remember it being an issue was with Steve Bradley.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of Memphis questions that recently came in.
Not from Charlie, right?
This first one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Charlie in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay, all right, okay.
What are your thoughts on Corey Macklin and his purchase of Memphis Wrestling? Do you think he officially killed the town, or was it already dead? Thank you for your time, and I will listen to the answer off air.
Oh, well, I thought he was going to say, the purchase of the Memphis Wrestling video collection, which we'll tell that story too. But no, Corey Macklin was the last co-host of Memphis Wrestling at Channel 5 in the glory days before it got, but when everybody knows that finally in 97, when Jarrett sold his half to Lawler, so Lawler owned everything, then Lawler brought that guy Larry Burton in as a partner, and they sold to the folks in Cleveland, that the whole thing fell apart. It ended up in lawsuits. Channel 5 in Memphis didn't want to do business with Larry Burton. They were not enamored of him, and then the whole thing got involved in the new owners, and that was a reason for Channel 5 to cancel the program. Ending the 20 years, as a matter of fact, 20 years, because it moved from Channel 13 in 1977. Anyway, so Corey had been, because Lance Russell had retired previously, several years previously. He had done the WCW stuff, then he'd come back and done the show for a year or two, and then he'd do it every once in a while when he was in town, but he had moved down to the Panhandle of Florida to be with his family, and Corey Macklin had a local advertising agency, grew up a huge Memphis wrestling fan like everybody else. Everybody in Memphis was a wrestling fan, but Corey he not only took it to new heights, he actually, you could tell by the way he announced, he announced like Lance Russell. He patterned because he wasn't an on-air personality. He had an advertising agency, but he'd never been on television until he did the wrestling, but he patterned himself after Lance. That was, in his mind, who a wrestling announcer was. And he did the program with Dave Brown in the last couple years that Memphis wrestling was around. Well, then, when it was revived, when Randy Hales got Power Pro Wrestling started on Channel 5. He brought Corey in along with Dave to do the show. Corey did a lot of the advertising. Corey was getting more involved with promoting, and he'd try to track down spot shows or get, casino deals or whatever. And then when Randy's Power Pro went away, he formed, and I can't give the entire chronology, but Corey finally formed his own Memphis Championship Wrestling. And I think Corey was going to be the one to promote the Lawler and Hogan match at the Pyramid, wasn't he? Until Vince found out that was going to happen. And then all of a sudden it wasn't Lawler and Hogan anymore. But he was Corey was doing the television program and then I think Channel 30 by that point was one of the local stations was where it was on. And he was trying to keep local wrestling alive and on television. And since he had an advertising agency, he could sell ads, try to make some money at it. And Memphis was probably the only place where a program like that could still work because of the tradition. And if I'm remembering correctly, they were still doing like a 2 or 3 or 4 local rating for showing tapes of the glory years and occasionally having new matches in the studio. So, Memphis was the place to get that done, and he would still be doing it if he hadn't, got killed in that car accident. How long's it been now? God, more than 10 years, maybe. But the purchase of the Memphis Wrestling Library, everybody knows that the lineage and the ownership of the Memphis Wrestling Tape Library, which that's a little gloriously put. There was no Memphis Wrestling Tape Library. A bunch of people saved a bunch of different shit. Some of it was in Jarrett's office. Some of it's Lawler's house. Some of it I've got on VHS. Other people, the bought shit at flea markets when they cleaned out the office.
None of it copyrighted, by the way.
None of it. It's public domain. Always out there. Yeah. It was always out there, and there's no real chain of custody on paperwork, which is why that even Jerry Lawler can't get it on the WWE network because there's no chain of custody of paperwork. And but anyway, Lawler was doing and Lawler and Corey were always fairly good friends, and Lawler would work with Corey and everything in his promotional ventures. So Lawler's doing an autograph signing years ago, and a guy brings him up a DVD for him to sign, and he starts to sign it, looks at it, and says, Corey Macklin presents Legends of Memphis Wrestling or whatever. And where'd you get this? Well, I bought it from the High Spots booth, that crooked High Spots that has screwed me on a couple different occasions, and I've told him what I think of him. He's a shyster and an asshole and a fucking crook. But he was selling them from his table. So Lawler goes over and is like, why were you selling Memphis Wrestling? Oh, we bought it from Corey Macklin. Corey Macklin had gone to the idiot that runs High Spots and said, I will sell you the rights to all the classic Memphis wrestling. And that's like me going to somebody at a flea market and saying, I'll sell you the rights to all the Star Wars movies. Because I got them right here on tape. So, of course, and actually, he didn't even do that because Corey Macklin said, if you track all the tapes down, you can sell them. You can put them together and sell them. I'll give you the fucking authorization. And the crooked High Spots, I heard that he knew there was something wrong with it, but he said, fuck it. He figured if he put Corey Macklin Presents on the cover, then they'd sue Corey Macklin instead of him, which is what happened because Lawler sued Corey Macklin. Because Corey got like $1,000 a piece for 20 volumes of this bootleg 14th generation ripoffs of VHS to whatever they cobbled together to put on these videos, whatever, for anything from first generation to 5th or 10th. and whatever they could find on YouTube, and they put them together and they paid Corey $1,000, so $20,000. So Lawler actually filed a lawsuit against Corey because he's like, what the fuck? I may not really own this shit, but you definitely don't. Right? And Lawler, honestly, is the closest person in the world existing right now. Probably comes close to fucking having a claim on it. But that's even not provable in a court of law. So, and then the lawsuit was still going on when Corey, had the car wreck and got killed. So that never went anywhere. But yeah, Corey Macklin presents. He said, like me selling Star Wars. I always liked Corey. I got along with Corey. He's a fun guy, but it was just, it's wrestling.
Bob Barnett told me a story years ago that somewhere, it may have even been Mike Lano's Sam Mushnick roast, he ran into Pedro Martinez. Not Ron Martinez, but Pedro himself. And Pedro was trying to sell him the master tapes of WWF TV tapings in Canada in the 80s. And Bob said, I'd love to buy him. Do you have the rights to them? He goes, sure, I got all the tapes. He goes, no, do you have the rights to these tapes? And that's why Bob didn't buy them, because basically he'd just be buying master tapes he couldn't do anything with. Pedro had none of the rights to any of that stuff. He just had tapes. Well, on that note, let's get another Memphis question. You know what?
I'll tell you what. If you produce content, whether it be for YouTube or television or radio or Skype or podcasts or whatever, and people are ripping that content off, they're trying to put it up and sell commercials on it, they're trying to take away your hard-earned and copyrighted work and cause you expense and suffering just to leech and draw blood like the sick vampires that they are, leech a life off of your sweat and tears? Well, I know the man to call.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Still serve the rest.
Brian, you served that one up to me on a silver platter. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Stephen P. New, the man for you. If you need to have something trademarked, he knows how to do that so that people can't be misappropriating your content and likeness anymore. And in all seriousness, he doesn't do that much trademark law, but he knows people that do. But he can handle anything else you might throw his way, whether you've been injured by a major corporation, whether someone's greed and avarice has damaged you or your family members. Stephen P., if you've been jacked around in some fashion by somebody and you feel that there is legal recourse, then call Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084, newlawoffice.com. Because if he don't know the guy to handle it, he can handle it himself and vice versa. And he's one of us, a member of the cult of Cornette, a longtime wrestling fan, a comic book collector, an anti-Trump activist, and all-around great guy. He's on the right side of history in every occasion. Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. Don't let people sell 20 volumes of your classic wrestling under an assumed name. Call Stephen P. New.
That's right. And before we went to that, I promised a second Memphis question.
Oh, God.
Let me ask it right now. Hey, I thought you liked Memphis.
From Charlie. No, you're feeding Charlie.
This was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from R.L. Reeves Jr. in Duck Run, Kentucky.
No, he's not.
That's what it says here. What's Duck Run, Kentucky like?
Duck Run, Kentucky is where my mother was born. And I don't think it exists anymore. I don't think it's existed for 50 or 60 years since the post office burned down.
Wait, so that just wipes it off the map?
There wasn't that many people there to begin with. It was way outside the big city of Corbin. And I don't know how many people Corbin, Kentucky has in it today, but in 1933, I would imagine it was high 3 or low 4 figures. And that was the big city down the road.
Well, here is RL.
I refuse to believe RL is from Duck Run, Kentucky.
Here is R.L. Reeves Jr.'s question.
As a matter of fact, they couldn't find Duck Run 1 month when the wind switched and blew in the other direction. They couldn't find it for over 3 weeks.
I'm hoping Jim Cornette will comment on the passing of Jim Blake, who in 1974 launched a Barbarian label as a vehicle for Jerry Lawler to release records like Bad News, 90-Pound Weakling, and of course the Ballad of Jerry Lawler.
Well, actually, we saw this. Mark James had retweeted one of the stories in the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, and Lawler had tweeted about it, and a number of people, this was last week, it happened. Jim Blake, a lot of wrestling fans anywhere wouldn't recognize that name, maybe slightly in Memphis would the wrestling fans recognize the name because he was never on television. He wasn't in the business, but he was friends of Lawler's from when they were in high school. And he was Jim Blake was a big collector, and he loved shit like I love, like we all love, old stuff. He had multiple collections. They said in numerous storage facilities locked away. Who knows what he had stashed away in his 50 years as a collector / hoarder, but he loved wrestling. He loved music. He loved, entertainment and ephemera and stuff like that. And he's the one not only started Barbarian Records as a label in Memphis for the Lawler records, which branched out. Not only was it Lawler, but then Plowboy Frazier, and I have this, by the way, Plowboy Frazier fancied himself a country singer at one point. And when he's friends with Lawler's here, make a record. And I think it's an old Furlan Husky tune, like Four Walls, I believe.
That was one of the big things in the article with his obituary that I didn't know, that there was a Plowboy Frazier record. So now I'm on the look for that.
Well, you'll probably find the only one that's still in existence probably here at the castle because it wasn't a big seller. I mean, it sounded like a fucking live recording at a dairy farm. But he started not only Barbarian Records, but also he was behind the early programs, the photo book that they did in Memphis for a while in 74, where they would sell a photo book of the previous week's matches at the Coliseum. He did that. And then when Jarrett broke off and started his own promotion in 77, the first 10 or 12 weeks of the programs, Jim Blake had a hand in when they weren't just the 4-page fold over, but they had a middle, say, were more pages and there was more written material. And he was always trying to do something to merchandise because he loved collecting shit, but merchandise the guys. And I mean, people still, Barbarian Records label is still kind of a thing in Memphis, along with, Stax and all the other classic labels people remember, because he did some Lawler's songs at that point. He was so big in Memphis, they got radio play and they were heard of. And, he did some other things, and Memphis is such a music town. But that's the thing. He was just always a fan and liked, being involved with shit like that. And he did stuff on and off during the period of time because he knew Lawler. And, but he, just a fascinating guy in a variety of things. That was just the way that he touched the wrestling business. I saw him, 5 or 6 years ago. I went down and did a Memphis comic convention with Mark James. That's where Lawler had his Batmobile. And we were next to him in the booth, and the Batmobile plays the Batman theme song over and over. I sat there for 8 hours listening to 45 seconds of on a loop. But Jim Blake was there, and taking pictures, looking around, and everything. And he's a nice guy. Sorry, to hear about that.
Am I wrong in thinking that some people have said that it was Jim Blake in the Dr. Frank outfit?
Oh, Jesus! TV? No! It was not. Jim Blake was never a wrestler or dressed up as a wrestler.
No, but have you ever heard that before? That it was him?
No. What story are you trying to perpetrate here?
I'm not trying to perpetrate. I'm trying to say I thought I heard that somewhere, and I'm trying to get verification on it.
Well, that's what. If he would have had to have wrestled, and he would have had to have been as big as Dr. Frank, and Jim Blake wasn't as tall as me.
All right. Well, let's get another question.
Oh, wait, are you saying it was him when they did the thing where it was in
the studio?
Dr. Frank was in the box?
Yeah.
I never thought to verify that it was the same Dr. Frank, because that was his debut. But I never thought to ask, well, was that because it was Ken Dillinger? It was doing the gimmick. I never thought to ask, was it really Ken Dillinger in the box when you introduced him? Could it have been Jim Blake?
Well, I'm sure someone will chime in and let me know if I'm completely off.
Okay, Mark James, help us out.
Let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Vince McMahon. I don't think that is really him here.
If that is indeed your real name.
What year was Ric Flair at his peak as a wrestler? I would define this as a time when he was both a great draw and promo, but before his matches became patterned and predictable.
Oh, God. Well, and that's kind of a backhanded way to end it on the way out. Rick did depend in latter years on a lot of repetition. I got to think 84 through 89, don't you? He never had a match purely as good as the matches with Steamboat again. But at the same time, from, 83 or 84 was when he really started traveling with the belt and working with everybody and seemed like he was in the best physical shape. And I mean, there was the matches with Wyndham in 85 through 87.
I would go back a little further to 82 or 83 because even the stuff he was doing in Dallas was great.
Well, yeah, true there. So, really pretty much the whole decade of the 80s. And I think the only reason, let's see, how old was he? He would have been, by the time that 1990 rolled around, he had just turned 40. And I mean, he was still working and working out and training at a high level for the rest of that decade, but he didn't. WCW was in turmoil. The WWF run only lasted a year and wasn't anything to write home about, as they used to say on Hee Haw. Just the 80s, he had all those great opponents, all those great matches, worked a variety of companies, went to Japan, had classics there. In the 70s, he had some great matches, but he was still learning at that point. When 1980 came around, he'd only been a pro for 8 years. That's about the time that if you're going to be a main event guy, you've probably got there by then. He'd already been there for fucking 5 years, but it was still he was a learning experience. So yeah, the 80s, pretty much the whole decade. Don't you think?
If you had to narrow it down to 1 year that you thought was his best year, would it be 89 or would it be a different year?
Well, best year where? Best year at the gate?
Well, certainly not 89 best year at the gate.
Well, yeah, that's what best year in the ring, because not only the trilogy with Steamboat, but the program with Funk. But then again, he had programs with Wyndham from 86 to 87.
Yeah, those are great.
And those matches, as a matter of fact, there's another match that I used to, because I have the VHS tape, the Crockett Cup 87, I would show Flair and Wyndham from the Crockett Cup 87 in OVW and in training seminars, or give them to the guys as homework. The only reason that Flair and Wyndham wasn't the best trilogy of the 80s is because of Flair and Steamboat. Because those matches were incredible when Barry was in shape and his window was a lot briefer than Flair's, unfortunately. But yeah, so best year at the gate would have been either 83 or 86. 83 when not only was the first Starrcade, but everything just got hot. Dallas was on fire. He's main eventing fucking crowds of 20,000 people in a variety of places. Or 86, obviously, because that was Crockett's biggest year ever. But, the best matches. And God, then in 89, it was early 90. I was going to say he had that TV match with Pillman. That was so good. He and Arn had the match with the Rock and Roll Express. Him and
Luger was good in 1990.
Him and Luger
the bad finishes at times.
Him and Wyndham against the Midnight Express on the Clash of Champions season beatings in December of 88. He had a lot of different matches and a lot of better matches. Maybe he was, you know what? It was not only that he was that good at that point and he had the right opponents to work with, but also he was probably trying to compensate, knowing Flair, for the fact that WCW was hamstrung by being owned by Turner at that point and business sucked. He was trying to will it to be better on the back of his performances, because Flair thought like that. So that, in the ring and at the gate was two different peaks.
Well, Jim, this next question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Joshua Powers. Hi, Jim and Mr. Breakfast Hater Brian. Hi, Josh. I've been watching 1997 to early 1999 WWF on the network, and Kevin Kelly is and was a far superior announcer. Why was Kevin Kelly passed over? Was it because of a certain individual named VR? Or was it the half man, half beaver known as Kevin Dunn?
You are correct, sir.
Beaver. I find myself getting sucked into Sunday night Heat episodes on the network because of Kevin, and I end up falling asleep because of Michael Cole. So why was Kevin Kelly passed over in favor of Michael Cole, Jim?
Bucky Beaver. Basically, here's what it was. Kevin was a guy who had done wrestling announcing in Florida and was a wrestling fan and did a very good job announcing wrestling matches. He was a little portly at the time. Aren't we all sometimes? And Kevin Dunn liked Michael Cole because Michael Cole had never been a wrestling fan, had never done any wrestling, but he had been a news correspondent and done real TV news, and was what Kevin Dunn thought was more cosmetically pleasing on camera for an announcer. Which, of course, and I'm not knocking Michael Cole when I say this. And Michael, it's not his fault that they brought him in and made him a wrestling announcer when he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And since then, as he's learned what the fuck he was doing as far as being a WWF announcer, and now all the WWF announcers sound like Michael Cole. But Kevin Dunn, and so went Kevin Dunn's opinion at the studio, so went everybody else's opinion. He thought that Michael Cole should be an announcer. He wasn't a fan of Kevin's because Kevin knew too much about wrestling, called wrestling like wrestling, and didn't look like the Anchorman announcer type that Kevin Dunn felt that Michael Cole looked like. That is the entire legitimate reason. And, yes, you could say Kevin could have lost some weight, which I think he did at one point. It didn't matter because they didn't change anything or do anything else for him any better. But what the fuck? Picking announcers because of the way they look and then training them to be announcers is just the same as picking wrestlers because they look at and training them to be wrestlers, which is also what they were doing at the time. It's fucking stupid. And if you don't go for cosmetically pleasing people as wrestling announcers, then you have just eliminated every goddamn great wrestling announcer in the history of wrestling. Except maybe Lord Blears.
Yeah, and by the way, Michael Cole isn't exactly GQ over there.
Well, no, but you're taking Kevin Dunn's assertion of what a good-looking male individual looks like. So there's going to be some fucking leeway there anyway with common sense. But that's the whole thing. Michael Cole had the rep because Kevin was high on him as a legitimate TV guy, and Kevin Kelly was a guy who announced independent wrestling in Florida. And Kevin's portly and Michael Cole has a mustache. I don't fucking know.
And Kevin's good at calling wrestling and Michael Cole isn't.
Yeah, I'm not explaining it. I'm just relaying it. That's the story.
And then later on, you got him in the Ring of Honor, correct?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because that was the thing is we originally wanted Kevin Kelly, and I've told this story, and Adam Pearce because we wanted a Mike Goldberg, Joe Rogan type of booth where you have a lead announcer that knows a lot about the sport, but he's an announcer. And then you have a color analyst that's an ex-jock, but not with a gimmick, not like a heel commentator or not a current wrestler or someone with a gimmick, but Adam at the time would have been presented as the retired Ring of Honor wrestler who is lending his color analysis. And he would have taken the kind of the Joe Rogan mold, even though Rogan wasn't a fucking retired fighter. He kind of had that jock vibe. And he knew everything because he's a fucking MMA nerd. Obviously, we didn't get Adam Pearce. We told that story before because of Ross the Merchandise Weasel and all the fucking petty outlaw mud show bullshit Ring of Honor politics with the fucking crew that they had in there at one time, which included the fucking Shane Hagedorn and the rest of those goofballs. But no, Kevin Kelly was the first and only choice as the lead announcer because he was the only guy that we felt had enough experience at calling wrestling that could call the new style of wrestling and get into it as the Ring of Honor, the hard-hitting, athletic, MMA, hybrid, crossbreed type of style, everything serious, no bullshit. And also he had a name and recognition from national television, but he was better. It was a better fit for him to call this kind of wrestling. So yeah, he was the only person I tried to get him. Yeah, damn it. When Ring of Honor had that show on HDNet, when HDNet was available in fucking 3 state mental institutions in the country, I guess at that point, I had to pay $10 a month extra just to get the one fucking station here in Louisville on my cable. But they were, it was television. And this time I was trying to help Kerry Silken, and they had gotten that guy, Mike Hogwood, who was a regional sports announcer in he had to be in his early 60s. I think he's since passed away.
He has.
Okay. He wasn't, a spring chicken, and he had never done wrestling and never really watched wrestling, but he did like basketball and different sports. He was from North Carolina. Imagine that. The only guy in the world from North Carolina that hadn't watched fucking wrestling. And they paired him with Dave Prazak from Chicago to try, because he had wrestling knowledge, but the problem there, and I like Dave, and I never had any issues with Dave. I told them to their face one time, I said, Mike Hogwood and Dave Prazak, it looks like a friendly grandfather and his delinquent fucking grandson that's out of the home for a day to fucking go on a field trip. Dave was not a cosmetically pleasing announcer, and he looked like a gimmick because he was a wrestling personality. And Mike Hogwood was completely lost and didn't even know what the holds were called, and didn't know how to even approach calling wrestling. And old Liver Lip Lagana was the one at that time that was having to go out and produce them. They did the voiceovers out at, where was HDNet's headquarters? Out west. Was it Phoenix? Was it Denver? Denver's where it was. Because that's where JR had to go when they do the New Japan voiceovers. But anyway, so Lagana would have to go out there and have to try to produce Mike Hogwood. And it was like pulling teeth. And so that's when Kerry had asked me to come up, I brought Kevin to one of the tapings in Philadelphia to speak, because at that time they weren't even doing commentary live. I saw Mike Hogwood the whole time I was doing the fucking show. I saw him there about 2 or 3 times. They would do the commentary as voiceover. They didn't even have an audio set up to do the commentary live. That's why the HDNet Ring of Honor show was so rotten. Not because they had bad matches. They had great matches because the audio was horrible. Because the announcers weren't there. They were doing it in post, which meant that the insane crowd reaction in the ECW arena was muted. It was like watching the show through a window. And because they were doing 8 or 10 weeks of television over 2 days taping time, they would just tape matches and they'd put them together. There was no flow and story. They were sending a big ass truck, a bigger truck than we even needed, but only sending half a crew because they weren't doing live audio. And the director had never had any experience doing wrestling. He just did the sports that HDNet fucking contracted with. And one time I remember I left the truck to go back in the arena and check something in the locker room and came back out. And the director and technical director, both people that HDNet sent, we had no say over the crew, technical crew. They'd gotten in an argument, and the director got mad, went back to the hotel, left the technical director to do the. Well, what difference is it? All he's doing is switching a fucking camera for a fucking, goddamn 4 hours that night. That's all. Which counts if you figure a camera switch for goddamn every 10 seconds or so. Do that math on how many you'll do in 4. But no, we didn't need a director. It was a zoo, and I'd brought Kevin Kelly there one time to speak to. God damn it! Now he's going to get mad at me. The kid. I say kid, he was probably 30 at the time, but a young man that was an executive at HDNet that had been a wrestling fan, that is one that sold him on Ring of Honor and New Japan. Adam Swift. That's what I said. Adam Swift or Alan. No, it was Adam Swift was his name. Nice young man. And Guy Mesger, who was an ex-MMA fighter, was there representing HDNet. Because he was the head of fight programming. And I went over in the corner with him and I said, look, Kevin Kelly has called some of the biggest names in the business on national and international television and pay-per-view. He's got experience with live broadcasting, live to tape. He's also got experience with lower budget productions. He knows how to get guys over. I said, I'm not saying that Mike Hogwood is a horrible person, but none of us standing here will live long enough to see him become a good wrestling announcer. And they're like, well, we don't want it to be where it's only for the wrestling fans. I said, no, it will be for people that speak English. That's what it'll be. That's what I found out, that apparently Mike Hogwood was friends with somebody back at the HDNet headquarters, and they weren't going to switch that announcer no matter what. And the only reason that they let Prazak be involved was because there was somebody that knew something about wrestling, because Hogwood knew absolutely nothing, but Hogwood was going to be on that program. So that's why I knew that we were cooked there. There was no reach to the show. Nobody knew it was there except the people that were already searching out Ring of Honor. And the program was unlistenable. It was just, I would watch it with the sound down because it hurt my heart so bad to listen to a television program that I had anything to do with that announcing that bad. But then, thankfully, right as the Sinclair talks got started, that's when HDNet decided they weren't going to continue with the program because they were spending money on the production and weren't getting a return on it because nobody was watching their station to begin with. It wasn't Access TV 10 and 11 years ago. It was fucking HDNet and nobody knew it was around. So they canceled the program, and the last Ring of Honor on HDNet aired in, I believe, April. And by September, we were on the air in with Sinclair. Now, there was a period of time there where if Sinclair hadn't gone for everything, we'd ended up with no TV. But no TV, honestly, was pretty much just about equal to what Ring of Honor had on HDNet. So anyway, I tried to get him there, Kevin, because it would have added to the program so much, but it wouldn't have fixed the fact that nobody was able to see it. So then when Kevin debuted on the Ring of Honor program with Sinclair, it gave it an even fresher look. But there was no other announcers that's the problem, is all of the veteran announcers, whether it be anybody from Kevin Kelly to Tony Schiavone to Jim Ross, everybody that did wrestling in the territories, that worked with promoters and bookers that understood how to do this shit and also had experience at a variety of budget levels, such as no budget at all or WWF, they're all my age or older. And all of the new wrestling announcers either come from the Michael Cole school of fake voiced over the top WWF announcing, or the excrement style of we're doing announcing over VHS tapes in our mom's basement because that's the way that we've done our local wrestling federation. And there's practically nobody in, but that's why it's so good to see Ian Riccaboni, by the way. And we've talked about this, and we haven't mentioned Ring of Honor yet today. This might bring this up real quick. Ian Riccaboni, I believe he worked a little bit with Kevin Kelly during the transition when Kevin was still there, but he's a young guy that calls wrestling like a sport, and you don't believe is conning you or bullshitting you. It sounds natural. And he's got a great delivery and a great vocabulary. And he and Caprice Coleman, we've praised them as the best announced team in wrestling because Caprice is the ex-jock that's glib, and it gives the color analyst role that you find now in everything from football to baseball to basketball, etc. to UFC. It's the same thing here. And this past weekend's Ring of Honor show I'll bring up was the first round of the semifinals in their pure tournament. Jay Lethal beat David Finlay, and Jonathan Gresham beat Matt Sydal to advance. And the match, Jay Lethal to me is the star. He was the star of that program, the star power. But both the matches were good. The guys are working hard and they're trying to be serious and legitimate because they're, as we've talked about, they're creating a baseline with this pure tournament. They're showing people what the product is supposed to be, wrestling with people following the rules. And I had actually, when I was watching Lethal's match with Finlay, and they do the tail of the tape, and they do the stats, and the announcers set up the history and the rules of the contest, and it's so effortless, and it sounds like you're listening to a sports program. But I had written down in my notes, I said, you know what? When somebody does cheat or do an angle, it will stand out. It will mean something because they're not doing them every segment. If they have blood, it'll be more shocking because you haven't seen it in a while. Things out of the ordinary will be, guess what? Out of the ordinary because you don't see them all the time. In this program with no fake crowd noise and no seizure-inducing lights and pyro. They even pitched to the breaks, by the way, talking about the announcing. Imagine that. In Jay Lethal's match, they had a great spot where Lethal was forced to use one of his rope breaks. He was in a hole that he couldn't get out of, and he was suffering, and you're only allowed 2 rope breaks, and he had to use one of them. He had to make that decision. Holy shit! Instead of a goddamn bunch of fucking midgets dressed up as goddamn circus clowns piling out of a fucking VW bus and honking funny horns. And then, as a matter of fact, in that match also, it was almost 15 minutes in. Lethal hit a dive as a logical offensive move, threw his guy back in the ring to try to beat him. There was a reversal and a counter of that, and then Jay hit his fucking finish once, 1, 2, 3. And the other match, Gresham got the tap out on Matt Sydal. He had a gory special, you know, the upside down surfboard. The gory special, which he dropped the guy into a fucking leg and arm hold and got the tap out. I've never seen it before. It was fucking cool. It was a solid match. Being honest, as I said, Jay Lethal was the star of the show. I've thought the world of him as a talent. I'm the one that signed him to Ring of Honor in, what was it, 2011? When TNA was stupid enough to not re-sign him. Because they had too many of Hulk Hogan's broke down fucking best friends and neighbors coming in. But on this program also, they finally, after 5 or 6 weeks, they did an angle. Vincent has tattoos all over his body, has the dreadlocks. He looks like a Rob Zombie. He's the horror king. That's his gimmick. And he actually was a young man who came to one of our tryout seminars 10 years ago and got on Ring of Honor's radar, and now he's a used commodity there. And he was doing a promo when Matt Taven hit the ring, and Matt Taven apparently has been gone for quite some time, and attacked Vincent and beat the piss out of him. And there was good about this and there was bad, which we'll get to. But let me say, Matt Taven is another guy. 10 years ago, he came to a camp. We started bringing him into the program. We started booking him. I thought he was going to be a huge fucking star. And unfortunately, he got sidetracked. He went to tryouts in, it might have still been FCW at that point, but down in Florida, and they jacked him around for a while and kept him hidden and never did anything with him and then let him go. And then he came back to Ring of Honor and then he tore a knee up real bad. I saw him back about 5 years or so ago, and he was coming back to a wrestling school to help out up in Connecticut when he was still in a knee immobilizer and everything. So he had that setback. But Matt Taven, I hate that he shaved his head. Or he hadn't shaved his head. He shaved his hair off on the sides. He's still got a little on the top, but he had long fucking rock star hair. What a fucking good looking kid. He was like early 20s then, so he's still in his early 30s. Very athletic. If he'd had an unobstructed path without injuries and people dicking him around, I think he'd be a big star today. But the problem I had with it, this was an angle, and it stood out because it was different, as I've said, and nobody else is doing it on these programs, so that was good. But we see one of the drawbacks of trying to do this in the COVID era. Apparently Sinclair, I read on PW Insider a while back at their tapings, have had the most strict COVID protocols. They changed the mat after every match. God, we couldn't even get them.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we couldn't even get them by fucking lunch 10 years ago, right? That Greyhound bus ticket for Prince Nana and the Hurricane to come down from New York to Baltimore. Well, that wasn't pre-approved. But anyway, there's only the wrestlers, the referee, and the camera crew allowed inside the arena when they're taping a match. All these protocols where they can't be together anywhere. So the problem with the angle was Taven jumps on fucking Vincent and is beating the shit out of him. Nobody's coming to help. Therein lies I know. And of course, they're doing that on shows where there's fucking 100 people within the goddamn ringside area, and they're still not doing it. Here, I can give them the fucking benefit because they weren't doing it that way, but it shows the problem. The longer the beating went on with nobody trying to stop it, nobody ringing a bell, nobody trying to pull them apart, nobody running around wringing their hands and clutching their pearls, it doesn't have the urgency and the danger, etc. But what Matt did was he pulled the mat up and then the padding up, and he gave an inverted DDT to Vincent face first on the ringwood, which looked good. Then he rolled out and set a table up on the floor, put Vincent on the table, and splashed off the top rope, splashed him through the table on the floor. He put a hat on a hat. Either one of those things would have been perfect as an exclamation point. Both of them was too much, and it hindered not having people trying to help, but that's understandable in the situation. But you can't do long heat angles without people trying to stop it. So anyway, they did something and it stood out because they haven't been doing it every week. That's what they're wanting. I hope they don't do it next week. Just can't start doing it this quick every week. And they're setting up their product to mean something just by itself, so that when somebody deviates from that, it also stands out. So if anybody wants to see all the things we were promised with AEW, watch Ring of Honor, and don't expect to see the fucking sodomizing of fucking 12 lesbian nuns on the program. They're wrestling, and they're going to wrestle for a while, and then they're going to start turning up the heat. And it's going to be gradual, and it's going to mean something. See, they're calling me now for more ideas. Hold on, let me... There, I'll just hang up on it.
Who was that?
I don't know who it was. I don't have time to talk to these people. We've got to be broadcasting. But anyway, Ring of Honor is a wrestling program, and it's going to hopefully stay a wrestling program and then gradually open things up, while meanwhile on all the other channels, everybody is fucking engaging in bestiality in the fucking garden. It's a sport, folks. The reason why it works is because it's presented as a sport, and then people deviate away from these things. And I don't know why everybody doesn't understand that you got to start there. It's like basketball, baseball, football, anything else. People are trained to do these things. There's specialized positions, specialized There's centers, there's guards, there's tackles. Not like you when you were in school and played football, you guarded the water and tackled anybody that tried to steal it. But there's all different positions and highly trained people in each place. It's like that new podcast we were talking about, hosted by Greg Olsen, who was a Seattle Seahawk tight end, used to play for the Carolina Panthers. And it's TE1. You know what that stands for? Tight end.
That's right.
Tight end, because Greg Olsen, a 14-year NFL veteran, 5th all-time in receiving yards at his position, the first tight end ever to have 3 straight seasons of 1,000 receiving yards. He is investigating the evolution of the tight end position for all you football nerds out there. From extra lineman to dynamic playmaker, through discussions with Hall of Famers and current superstars like George Kittle and Travis Kelce, Shannon Sharp, Tony Gonzalez, other household names. Folks, you'll find out how every great player started off at a different position before transitioning to tight end, how they finally found their niche, what makes tight ends a unique position. I've almost never been able to get into the tight end position, even with several girls helping me at the same time. Folks, you'll find out about these guys balancing the glamour or the big receptions with the grind of sacrificing your body and throwing blocks, who the Hall of Famers looked up to for inspiration, all that. You got to listen to TE1 with Greg Olsen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. TE1. It's A1.
All right. Well, speaking of A1, or at least something that potentially could or couldn't be A1, while we're recording this show today, several people have tweeted me that a video, I guess, has gone around today of The Undertaker when he was the Master of Pain, his first promo in Memphis.
Oh, God, in Memphis?
And they want me to play it for you, I guess, give it a grade, give it the Jim Cornette sign of approval or maybe a dismissal.
Well, I saw it when it happened. But if you want to play that, go right ahead.
Let's play some audio. Here is an early Undertaker, a young Undertaker when he was
this is a young Mark Calloway. The first,
That's
after
right.
he left Dallas, after he left Texas, after he was trained, the first territory he worked was Memphis. And he's a big 6'9", red-haired guy in tights and being told to talk on television for the very first time and not real comfortable with it.
Let's go to this right now.
Calls himself Master of Pain.
Yeah, that's right. Master of Pain. Because where I've been the last 5 years, you have to know how to handle pain. And I know it better than anybody. I've been in the Atlanta State Penitentiary. I'm not ashamed to know it. I went up there on a bad rap because 2 punks jumped me in a parking lot, and now they're pushing up daisies. And let me tell you, Jerry Lawler, whatever you call yourself, it doesn't matter to me. Like I said, names aren't important where I'm from. But I tell you what, Ricky Morton sent me here, and I'm going to do a job for him. And brother, if you get out alive, you'll be thankful.
Master of Pain. Don't know his name. Not sure I want to.
Well, there it is.
If you get out of line, you'll be thankful.
So the backstory is he went to prison on a bad rap.
Yeah.
Although he seems like he murdered the 2 guys that jumped him in a parking lot.
It was their fault. They instigated it. See, they at least guys were given backstories where they showed up, they explained to you where they come from or why they're there, a little bit about them. But the problem is, as I went through the same thing. In Memphis in those days, either if Jerry Jarrett was there, he was the one to do it. If Jerry Lawler was, if Jarrett wasn't there, Lawler was usually the one to do it. But they would bring you in the bathroom, which is where the finish meetings took place, because we didn't do it in front of the television employees. They'd bring you in and say, okay, here's your segment. Talk about this, or here's your match you're going to do there, whatever. And then Dundee sometime would do it when he was the booker. But basically, for a new guy, they'd give you some idea of your backstory, like they did with poor Mark there. And he remembered some of those words in that interview. And I'm sure it sounded a lot better when either Lawler or Jerry Jarrett or even Bill Dundee said it. It sounded like it was plausible and it was scary and intimidating or whatever. But by the time a lot of the young green guys would get out there and do it on live TV, I went through the same thing. My first week was had the stench of grisly death because I was just boring and bland and intimidated by being out there. But then hopefully some people get it and some people don't. So, but at least it was an effort to give him a backstory. But people who aren't experienced with speaking on television often have a problem with it, especially when they're trying to be someone that they may not be, especially when they've just been told 30 minutes before that who they are. And you got to be quick, and you got to get quick.
Okay, well, let's quickly get a few more questions in before our watch along.
You got to be quick.
This next one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Dennis Eaton in Austin. To borrow a phrase from Vince McMahon, here is some mental masturbation for you. If hypothetically, Ted DiBiase never joined the WWF in the 1980s, who do you think could have taken and successfully carried the $1 Million Man gimmick? And then he lists a few names here, so I'll give you these names if you think it's one of them or potentially someone else. But Terry Taylor, Gino Hernandez, Robert Fuller, Ron Fuller, and it says especially if he played the character in the vein of Ted Turner, Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, Nick Bockwinkel.
Okay, well, immediately take the Fuller brothers out of the equation because I don't think that Ron or Robert Fuller and Vince McMahon would be able to coexist on a regular basis, especially if one of them was trying to do Vince's favorite gimmick that he created at that point. He was high on that one. And also he would not have liked Robert Fuller, one of the greatest fucking interviews ever, hilarious and fucking just wild, and he would have hated the Southern accent, Vince would have. And I think Ron would have decided that hockey was considerably less of a fucking headache. No, Ric Flair wasn't going to take that gimmick because at the time Ric Flair was Ric Flair, and you couldn't change that. Honestly, of all the people that were mentioned, it was a Tully and a Gino thing because that was really kind of an offshoot of what Tully and Gino were doing when they were partners in Texas. The suits, the sports cars. Gino lived like he was rich, even if he wasn't. And Tully gave off the vibe of being the jock son of the, famous wrestler promoter. So, I mean, I don't know if either one of them, obviously Gino wasn't alive by that point. And Tully, was still in WCW or in the NWA WCW, and then, got jacked around by Herd, but they would have fit that gimmick and been able to carry off that personality better. Was there anybody else on that list I missed?
What about Bockwinkel? That was on the list.
No, because Nick, by that point, he retired the same year DiBiase became the $1 Million Man, didn't he?
Nick 87, I guess so. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, Nick was not only established, but was ready to retire. He wouldn't have taken on a new gimmick if he'd been offered it to him. And Nick was an intelligent man and realistic enough to know that with him in his mid-50s at that point, to take a new gimmick and go on the road with the WWF. I mean, I'm acting like he was ever offered this, but no, that would have not worked. And also Nick was established, and Nick wasn't about the money and rubbing it in that he was a playboy or that he lived in mansions or had sports cars or whatever. He was a very cerebral, intellectual, elitist kind of person like that did those interviews where he made people mad because he used words they didn't understand. It wasn't the same thing, and he wasn't that same kind of person. Even if he was younger, he wouldn't have fit that gimmick like a Tully or a Gino, who it was actually that the $1 Million Man gimmick is closer to who Tully Blanchard and or Gino Hernandez were in real life than who Ted DiBiase was. Ted just made it work.
Also on the list was Terry Taylor.
Yeah. No, because then if Terry had that gimmick, he would have made seeming like a rich millionaire boring. Terry, he had nothing whatsoever in common to do with any of that. Terry was, to me, a great babyface on his own. As a single, he was a tremendous in-ring babyface performer, great shape, great looking, pussy magnet. Matter of fact, Dundee used to say about Terry Taylor, if you busted his head open, little pussies would fall out. But as a heel, he wasn't the top guy. And as a heel, he was either on the card or he could have been a good heel as a tag team guy. I didn't see him because his promos weren't strong enough, and he just didn't bring that heel oomph to something like that. No, I don't think that would have fit.
So you think DiBiase was the perfect guy for the role?
Yeah, really. I mean, well, he made it. He wasn't maybe, as we said, the only perfect one, but of course, Tully and Gino, neither one were available for different reasons, including death. But and maybe there's somebody else that I'm not thinking of that if you looked at it with a critical eye, wow, he would have been a great choice. But it's just hard now to see anybody else but Ted doing that. And because of one thing, the promo was so good. Ted's promos as a babyface were okay, but as a heel, they were great. And he could work in any position, but it was the oomph of the gimmick that really, made him a big star at that point.
Well, here's another question for you. All the joking about him aside, do you think Virgil, the wrestler we know as Virgil, was the perfect guy for that role?
I mean, he did it well. I can't say that anybody else couldn't have done it. The best I can say is he did it well, but it's not like anybody else couldn't have done that, being serious.
Do you remember any reaction at all when all of a sudden he showed up on Nitro as Vincent?
No.
No.
Wait a minute, you mean from Office or
from
fans?
The Office? You were working for the World Wrestling Federation?
That's what I meant. There was that nobody gave a shit, Office or fans. There may have been a tickle in the Office, kind of like, pfft. That was about it.
All right. Well, our next question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Paul in Liverpool, the United Kingdom.
He's a Liverpoolian.
I recently listened to an interview with Arn Anderson where he talked about his payoffs. He said the biggest payoff he ever received was $12,500 whilst working for Crockett, although he stated he was promised $25,000. He also said he never received the amounts the guys at the top were getting paid. This surprised me, as Arn was one of the top guys at the time. I thought he would have made much more. I'd also be interested in Jim's thoughts on this and how it compares to the payoffs the Midnight Express received around the same time.
Well, yeah, we got some heat started here because the best payoff we ever got from Crockett was $10,000 a piece instead of $12,500. Crockett never promised anybody any amount of money. So when Arn says he was promised, I think I know what it might be, because before the Great American Bashes, in '86, the first series of tours, Flair had been telling at least all the heels in our locker room, it's going to be like 12 Starcades. And we had, for Starcade 85, we got $5,000 a piece because we weren't the feature match. So we'll take 12 of those. That's $60,000. Well, it didn't turn out to be 12 Starcades. As I've publicized and I printed it in the book, we made about $23,000 that month instead of $60,000. So that may be what he's thinking about. We were never promised any amount of money beforehand, but for obvious reasons, because just in case Crockett didn't want to fucking back himself into a position. We were given guarantees with guarantees per year, but not per show. Having said that, I'd like to know what he got 12.5 on when we only got 10 grand for the fucking scaffold. Because Arn was not on time. Starrcade 86 was the biggest show they ever did, and we were way on top of Arn on that one.
How do you think the payoffs were for the War Games that summer in 87?
Well, but it was not for any individual show. As a matter of fact, you know what? Arn may have been thinking about the check that he got for the bashes in 86, which were paid all at the same time, as we've talked about many times, because that's when Ole and Arn worked with the Rock and Roll primarily, but the Midnight and I were with the Road Warriors and Baby Doll, Dusty and Magnum and Baby Doll. We were a main event on some of the bash shows and higher on the cards than Ole and Arn at that point. That's why Ole said in Huntington that time, so, well, I never thought I'd be in a business long enough to see a fat manager and some dumb cunt make more money than me. And that's why I said, on behalf of the dumb cunt, the fat manager would like to thank you for blazing the trail and allowing this to happen. Is when I got over with Ole. But that may be what he got for the 86 bashes. Because here's the thing, with before pay-per-view, there was no way for an individual show for you to make payoffs like the pay-per-view payoffs were, unless you were the NWA champion or fucking in the absolute main event of, there have been a number of times that guys that, like Flair and Kerry did 400 grand. They got 20 grand or better from a house show without pay-per-view, but those were few and far between. So I don't know of any individual event that Crockett ran that Arn Anderson would have got $12,500 on. But having said that, a lot of people forget that Arn, even though he came in 85, Arn was the TV champion. Arn was a member of the Four Horsemen, but Arn was the utility guy, because he was not only the worker and workhorse, but the guy you could beat in the Horsemen and not be beating Flair, because you can't beat Flair, or not be beating Luger because he's the giant and he doesn't know how to work, so you can't beat him. And, whatever. Arn was in a lot of singles. Arn and Tully didn't get together as a regular tag team until 87. So Arn was in the Horsemen and was so good and such a talent and in all the angles, but he didn't make what Flair made. He didn't make what the Road Warriors made. He didn't make what Luger and Sting made. We didn't make what fucking Luger and Sting and the Road Warriors made. And to be quite honest, Midnight Express may have not outdrawn the Road Warriors, but we sure as fuck outdrew Luger and Sting there during that period. But they were paying them for what they thought their future contribution would be. So it's not hard to believe that Arn was not in the top moneymakers in Crockett Promotions. And then we just talked about this last week. When we renegotiated our contracts, me and the Midnight Express, Tully and Arn were still in that process. And those renegotiations for new contracts got cut off when Crockett realized that he was in financial trouble. Ours had already gone to the point of no return. So that fall, when TBS started paying on Crockett's contracts, if Arn had got a new one, he would have at least got fucking, well, no, because they left. Goddamn, they left because they quit in September and went to the WWF right before Turner started paying on those guarantees, equal amounts every 2 weeks. And then when he came back, he was promised $250,000. He and Tully both, but when Hurd fucked Tully around, Hurd also cut Arn to $150,000 because he wasn't as valuable without his partner.
Maybe that's what it was.
That Hurd wouldn't fucking bring in. So maybe that was.
Maybe that's the confusion, because the guy said $12,500, but he was promised $25,000. Maybe he left off a zero on those.
Well, no, he phrased that though, working for Crockett, the most he ever made. I don't know. Point is, a lot of guys didn't keep their records. I did.
Our next question Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Philip in Jupiter, Florida.
I was about to say, with all the rings around Saturn and Uranus, you landed on Jupiter?
He specified here, Florida, not the large gaseous planet. I'm curious what Jim thought of the Rockers. When did he first hear of a knockoff called the Midnight Rockers? I know gimmick plagiarism happened all the time back then, but this seems pretty egregious. Despite their obvious merit as a team, and Shawn's legacy as one of the greatest of all time, what was Jim's impression at the time of the Rockers? Also, what was the impression that they made on the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express?
Well, the Rock and Roll didn't like it one little bit, obviously, because it's their fucking gimmick and almost their name. And I got kind of a kick out of it, a tickle, I should say, because they had to, the Midnight and the Rock and Roll was drawing so much money, they had to figure out a way to incorporate both of our names into one team and then rip off Ricky and Robert's gimmick. And I'm not knocking Shawn or Marty, either one, for doing that, because they weren't, you know, they were basically, they said, here's what you're going to do to have a fucking job. I think that actually, honestly, is the most open that the WWF ever was about admitting that they were ripping off the competition. Because with Demolition, at least the name was nothing like the Road Warriors. And, you know, even though it was kind of the same thing visual, but they went all out. Not only the Rock and Roll Express's clothes, but both teams' names in the name, Midnight Rockers.
By the way, the bigger ripoff to the Road Warriors, I always thought, was when the Powers of Pain came in as baby faces in '88.
Well, yes, and that was pretty egregious also. But yeah, when the Midnight Rockers, they were with Vern first, and we saw them on ESPN, and then when they went to Vince, they took Midnight Rockers out and just made them the Rockers. But it was, you know, I didn't care because it was nothing like the Midnight Express. The Rock and Roll Express were not fucking happy. And then later on, you know, with when they went to the it was actually, I got a kick out of it because they're admitting that they have to copy what we're doing because it was so hot. So I wasn't upset, but Ricky and Robert were highly displeased.
They had some great matches with Tully and Arn, with the Hart Foundation, with the Orient Express. I always like the Power and Glory match, but that's more of a squash than anything else. Did you watch any of their matches? Did you ever pay attention, especially when Tully and Arn were there, to the tag team matches?
Yeah. Because they were good. Michaels and Jannetty were a good team. Athletically, they were better than Ricky and Robert. The difference in why they never achieved anywhere near the success of the Rock and Roll Express came down to not, you know, what they were capable of doing in the ring, but just the fact that it wasn't Ricky and Robert. They were the second team that came along. It was an obvious ripoff. Almost everybody, even most of the WWF fans, because it was so hot in '86, had seen the Rock and Roll. So they were viewed as a, you know, a ripoff kind of thing. They weren't pushed to the moon like Ricky and Robert were, because even then the WWF was not featuring tag team matches in their main events on the house shows and on pay-per-view or whatever the fuck. So they weren't pushed like Ricky and Robert. And also they weren't neither one of them. Shawn Michaels could sell, but nobody could sell like Ricky Morton. And, you know, Marty Jannetty could make a great comeback, but it wasn't Robert Gibson. It just wasn't them. It wasn't the first. And they didn't have matches. They didn't have opponents that Rock and Roll had. They didn't have matches the way the Rock and Roll had them. They didn't get sympathy the way the Rock and Roll did. It was just a copy team. They were great. They had great matches, but they didn't draw a fraction of the money or sell the tickets or gain a prominent place as did Ricky and Robert, which is why, you know, Marty's still making up murders from 45 years ago. And, you know, Michaels did okay for himself, but not as a tag team.
I think I saw somewhere his latest story is that he was jumped at Kennedy Airport recently.
What's a frequency, Kenneth?
I think he may need some serious
Well, yeah, here's the thing. He made up a story on social media about murdering a guy when he was a teenager and went with that until he said he was getting flagged on planes and brought in for questioning. And then he decided to tell the truth that he was really working an angle with a law enforcement professional that he knows that they would have a match where if he lost, he would go to jail. But then now recently he said, no, I just said that because I didn't want to get in trouble and be stopped on planes. But really what I did was I killed the guy and we buried we didn't throw it in the river, but I think he buried it somewhere. You know what Marty Jannetty needs? BetterHelp. Folks, the friends that we have at BetterHelp can even help Marty Jannetty. Is something interfering with your happiness, preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 48 hours. Professional counseling done securely online with a broad range of expertise that may not be locally available. Of course, in the pandemic, you don't want to go out and be locally available yourself anyway. This service is available worldwide. You can log into your account anytime, send a message to your counselor. You get timely responses. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed to find the right match. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Maybe this would help not only Marty Jannetty, but also folks like COVID Chris and all the people who are just miserable out there. Folks, visit BetterHelp.com/JCE. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/JCE. Get 10% off your first month's services. Join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. BetterHelp.
All right,
Help me.
Well, hold on. Before we get to our watch-along, one final question, an off-topic question.
All righty.
Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John Fell in Baltimore.
Oh, boy, I think you're on the payroll.
You think I'm on John Fell's payroll?
You and Uncle Dave, the dynamic dude, are taking graft under the table.
Oh, give me a break. Here's John Fell's question, which he did not pay for. Knowing that you sold your copy of Amazing Fantasy number 15 a few years ago, what now are your top 5 Holy Grail comics? The top 5 books you have always wanted, but never had. And John shares his top 5 here, which is Showcase number 4, the beginning of the Silver Age with the first appearance of Barry Allen, the Flash.
Right.
All-Star Comics number 3, the first appearance of the very first superhero team, the Justice Society of America. Detective Comics number 38, the first appearance of Robin. Marvel Comics number 1, the first Submariner and the original Human Torch. And finally, Fantastic Four number 1, the launch of the modern Marvel Comics.
I was about to say, John don't want much, does he? He's naming some high-priced... I had Fantastic Four number 1.
Oh, man, really?
Oh, well, I had a whole run. I had a run of every Marvel superhero comic from 1962 to 1975. Everything. Most of the DCs, but all the Marvels. I actually paid $10 for that Fantastic Four number 1. It wasn't in great shape, but that was in 1970 or 71. My cousin was going to UK at the time, over in Lexington, and found one for $8 in a used bookstore over there, but he said it wasn't in very good shape. So that was that book today is a fucking multi-$100,000 book in high grade. But anyway, my Holy Grail, because I never had the Showcase 4. I did have Flash 105, and I sold it in the 90s. It was a very fine. I could have got 15, 20 grand for it today. I had the one book I always wanted was Action 1, the first Superman. And old Howard Rogofsky, who I've later found out was a wrestling fan, and I met Howard Rogofsky at a Charlotte Fan Fest. He was producing stuff with Handsome Jimmy Valiant. He had an action #1 on sale in his catalog for $400 in 1971, and I couldn't talk my mom into it. And that book today is, in any condition, is worth six figures, and in higher grade is worth $2 or $3 million. Detective 27. I'm not going to go for the first Robin. I'm going for the first Batman. That's when I was a kid. It wasn't any holy grail to get anything Silver Age, and even stuff from the 50s. It wasn't, if you weren't a 12-year-old kid, if you were just a normal adult, you probably had the money to buy everything except Golden Age comics. And those were the ones that were starting to be pricey. Not nearly as pricey as they are today. I think maybe the guidebook price for Action 1 in fucking very good condition in 1971, the first year of the Overstreet, I think was probably somewhere around $400. Now it's $3 million, whatever. But I would go Action #1, Detective 27. I really like Marvel Comics #1 because that would be the first Submariner and Human Torch. Captain America #1 because I've always been a Captain America fan. And I loved the backstory that he had then, and the covers with him punching Hitler during the war, everything. Those are so classic. And, fifth one, Wild Card, bitches. I may have to, I don't know whether I would go for another multi-million-dollar superhero book. I had Submariner #1, the Golden Age version #1 at one point, but it was coverless. I had Submariner #4 with a rolled spine. I loved Submariner. He was covered in Marvel Comics. I would probably go with something really off topic of the superhero and go with something pioneer like Famous Funnies #1, which was the first comic book in a modern comic book format and it was newspaper reprints that we would recognize today, or something just really obscure like that. I have a copy of Famous Funnies 4 from 1934. Got that at the flea market for $1 when I was 10 years old. What about you?
Whatever it is, years ago I decided I really didn't care about having the original copies. I cared about having the stories. So one of the things I collect is Marvel Masterworks, where Marvel takes all the original comics and puts them in a hardcover edition. Looks great. So I try to get as many of those as possible.
Looks great, less filling.
Looks great, less filling. I have 3 rows on a bookshelf filled with them. There are plenty I still need. Some of them go for ridiculous prices. I wait for them to come to my price. But I like having those. I'm a big collector of collections of old newspaper comics. I have just about everything like the Smithsonian book and various things from Crazy Cat to, I just recently got both editions, the giant size, and giant size is not even doing it justice, every single Little Nemo in Slumberland.
Oh my God, that's going way back.
That goes way back, but they're the most beautiful, stunning things that ever appeared in a newspaper. And that was by Taschen Books, who puts out great stuff. They did the Theo Errett Exquisite Mayhem book. I just ordered from them, and I think it comes out today, actually, so it should be arriving any day now. They put out a brand new History of EC Comics book that is 14 pounds, and the dimensions are 13 by 19. So it's a massive book. And it has like behind the scenes stuff as well as reprints and original sketches. That one I can't wait to get my hands on. But I'm not a collector of, if things fell into my lap, it'd be another thing. But I'm not a big collector of the original books just because the prices are ridiculous for the things I would want. I just like having complete collections of the entire storylines.
Well, see, that's the thing. When I was a kid, a real human being could actually still put together, because I did as a child, runs of all of these books that now you can't even begin to fucking touch it unless you're a investment banker or whatever. So that's, I agree with you. It's nice to have the bound and the reprints and everything, but I always like the smell and the feel and the look of the old books and everything. They've just gotten so ridiculous.
Like, I actually want to open them and read them from time to time and go back and read the issues. I would feel bad if I had any of the original, let alone if I got it graded.
I read my Amazing Fantasy 15 the night before I sold it again.
Wow, really? Interesting.
Just because I hadn't looked through it in a while, but that was part of the fun. But I will agree with you. Now that they've got the books slabbed and graded and encased in plexiglass, if you can't smell it and feel it, it just. But that's the way of the world.
Like the Wrestling All-Star trading cards that Kaiser put out. I love those cards. I don't think I would like them as much if every one I had was like a graded card where it's in a special sleeve and it has the grading on top. I don't know. To me, that takes away some of the fun of having them.
Well, but besides it, we found out they're worth more than any other wrestling cards. I've had a couple of sets of those forever because some of my pictures are on them. I didn't realize they were the first widespread wrestling cards of the modern TV era, and it's the first Hulk Hogan card, and
that's where it's ridiculous. It's called the Hulk Hogan rookie card.
Yeah, the printing was because Norm Keitzer's printing was haphazard at best. It was, and I never thought much of them. I had mine sitting around for ages until I found out they were worth thousands of dollars, and then I put them in a bag.
Okay, well, at least they're in a bag now.
Now they're in a bag.
Well, this show's in a bag. It's time for our watch along.
Is it? Well, at least the thing about this is there is no necessary setup to this as far as storyline or politics behind the scenes or whatever. This is just, as we were talking about, an example of Andre the Giant as the folks in the United States didn't get to see him, as more of a menacing monster heel. And Stan Hansen credits this match as really getting him over in Japan because Andre was such an institution. Thing is, when you think about it, Andre didn't need necessarily. Vince could always create an opponent for him over here, King Kong Bundy or Kamala or, another giant, right? Because after initially when, Andre did well from the time that he was in Montreal, either with a Battle of the Giants like with Don Leo Jonathan or with handicap matches or just being an attraction. But in Japan, there was more emphasis on the in-ring work and the physical competition, and everybody had to put out and go harder. And it was hard to find the giants that were weight-wise to match up with Andre. Couldn't physically hang in a lot of cases with a long match or at least a hot match of a Japanese style. And the guys that were as tall as Andre, but not necessarily as heavy, were probably a little bit more athletic, but they didn't look like they had the oomph in a lot of cases to test Andre. But with Hansen, in the shape that he was in and the presentation that he had at that point, this was what, 1981?
September 81.
Okay. He was 300 pounds plus. So, and just the toughness of him and the way that he hit and the way that he moved, he was heavy enough to be believable, but he was also, what was stand back in those days, as we all get older, we shrink a little bit, but he had to be 6'3", 6'4" every bit. He looked close enough to somebody, to Andre, that could be visually competitive physically. And then with his style and his aura and his toughness and the way that he hit and moved, you could buy it. And Andre, I think, realized this, and he wanted not only to help Hansen, but also to create himself another opponent in Japan. And so he did the things that Andre would do if he really liked you. He would let you do things, and he would give you more offense. And Hansen credits this as really, being a breakthrough for him to another level in Japan. And it was at the time that I first got it and saw it, which was when it happened. I was getting the Japanese tapes regularly. I was like, fuck, I've seen a lot of Andre. I've never seen Andre like this. It just, it clicked. And they had great chemistry together. So that's kind of the set. Can you think of anything else the people need to know?
Well, just in terms of what was happening in Japan at the time, Stan Hansen was one of the top gaijin for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And then a few months before this, something happened that would change the trajectory of Stan Hansen's career in Japan. Abdullah the Butcher jumped to New Japan from All Japan.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects of that were, again, this match with Hansen and Andre is September. I believe it was June or July in an airport in Amarillo. Giant Baba flew in just for a meeting with Stan Hansen that Terry Funk arranged. And they made the deal there that Stan Hansen would jump to All Japan at the end of the year. So by the time this match is taking place, Stan Hansen knows he's going to be in All Japan in December, where he makes a very memorable appearance for the finals of the Real World Tag Team Tournament. Bruiser Brody and Jimmy Snuka versus Dory and Terry Funk, and all of a sudden Stan Hansen's at ringside. It's one of the great moments in Japanese wrestling history. And then, of course, there's a great brawl after the match where Hansen jumps in and helps Brody and Snuka beat the Funks, and then Team All Japan makes the save, Jumbo Tsuruta, Giant Baba, and Hansen gets bloodied and leaves. But all of that's in play right here, because Abdullah jumping to New Japan was where Hansen realized, now I'm one more down on the totem pole. Because they already had Hogan, who's starting to get over big time. They have Andre, who's a heel there. So, I mean, in America, we had babyface Andre. In Japan, it was a totally different Andre. And now you add Abdullah, who had been one of the top stars for All Japan. Hansen thought he was going to get lost in the shuffle. And that's what led to him jumping to All Japan 3 months later.
Well, there you go. So, how are we going to watch this? Tell the folks. There's a little wild card, bitches. It's not on YouTube. We got another one. Tell them how to get a hold of this.
Someone loves their Always Sunny. Here's how we get a hold of this.
It's Always Sunny in Janela. Anyway, go ahead.
Here's how you find this video. It's on Dailymotion, dailymotion.com. The name of the video is Andre the Giant versus Stan Hansen, and it's numbered the way you would do a date in England, I guess, 81.9.23. So obviously September 23rd, 1981, but Andre the Giant versus Stan Hansen, 81.9.23. The name of the account is Classics Revival. There are several versions of this match on Dailymotion. By far, this is the cleanest quality copy that is available on Dailymotion. So you're going to go there. The difference between this and something we watch on the network or on YouTube is you have to immediately pause it. I don't know how it is for everyone else, but it'll play right away as soon as you get to the page. So you want to pause it and then just rewind the video so it's at 000.
Very well said.
Jim, are you ready on your end?
I am.
Okay, the way we're going to do this is a 5-second countdown, and then I'll say press play now. As soon as I'm done with the word now, press play.
There you go.
Simple as that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Press play now.
And there's Andre stepping over the top rope and the big boot to Stan. They didn't waste any time here. This is the 81 Bloody Fight series, by the way. And I mean, look at Hansen. He's all motion. He talked about this in his book. This was his style, the way that he wanted to bring his shit to the people in Japan, always moving, always into it, because he saw that they reacted to that. And it didn't mean he was doing everything he knew every second, but he was always in motion or trying to be aggressive, even offense, defense, whatever. And you can see here also, Andre's so huge, but Hansen doesn't look out of place like a lot of guys did, next to him. You could buy this. And automatically, Andre over him, but look at Hansen fighting like a fucking baby face, because anybody can get sympathy when they're in the ring with Andre. And this was Stan's whole thing. He was trying to take over from the old guard at this point. That's what the youth that he used to do. He said he was actually saying youth, because he was the young generation, him and Brody and guys like that were taking over from the Funks and all the people that had been the big American stars in the 60s and 70s.
Now, in America, no one had ever seen Andre like this.
No, because he had his big man match, and in places like obviously the big buildings in New York, Philadelphia Spectrum, or in a place like Houston or someplace where he was going to get a big payoff. He was in a lot. You know, he'd give the guy the slam every once in a while, set up the angle, or he'd have more competitive matches, but he wouldn't heel and he certainly wouldn't work like this. And he's wrestling. So here you got a chance to see Andre as a wrestler, just a wrestler that happened to be the biggest one in the fucking world. And by the way, that's Hansen selling. This is before the tap out. A lot of people now go back and look at older matches where guys are tapping the mat, selling like, oh, please don't. And they're giving up. There was no tap out in these days. So that meant nothing. And boy, that big fucking melon head of Andre's. Seriously, that size, that bucket head using fucking headbutts and shit, that was some believable shit. But look at him sell. He knew how to sell, and he knew how to sell proportionately. If a guy smaller than Hansen was hitting him like that, he still may sell it, but not as big. It was a proportion of a thing. And look at the way he's able to use the ropes and just use the ring and do the old, heel tricks. He'd been in the business 15 years at this point. He turned pro in 1966. As when we talked to Bertrand Hebert this week on The Experience, and Andre, as you see, is calling this whole thing and stands more than happy to do whatever. He knew how to stop. And look at that bump. And look at the people running. He knew how to stop himself. He knew how to boil the heat up a little bit and then fucking give the guy a fucking flurry. And Hansen's not going to back up. He's going to be aggressive because he sees this as his chance. But this is a whole different Andre the Giant than anybody who just saw the WWF in the 80s. And here you go. He's going to try for it. That was always the thing. Can anybody slam Andre? So you'd have a lot of guys trying, but not many would carry through with it. Look at that picture.
And by the way,
in the size of the head. Go ahead.
This is months after Andre had broken his ankle. That happened earlier this year.
That's right. If this was September, it wouldn't have been that many months after he got back in the ring.
That's right.
And look at he's working the people. He's selling. He registers shit, but it looks plausible. And look, Andre the Giant with a double wrist lock. He did that quite often. Working with Gorilla Monsoon as a tag team partner, I'm sure.
It's interesting when Terry Funk went to Japan because he was a babyface, he always shaved all of his facial hair off. Because Andre was a heel, he let it grow.
Yeah. And it's simple and it's subtle, but it gets the picture across without telling people, I want you to boo me and here's why. I remember once again seeing this because even though I had seen Andre a number of times, not only live, but also on tape as a heel in Japan, this was still more than he was usually fucking giving people. And he was really getting up and down. When's the last time you saw Andre go down and get up that quick? Hansen fighting from underneath puts him in a position of being a babyface, but at the same time, he's still an ass kicker. Because who else could stand up to Andre like this? And just boom, seamlessly and into a fucking suplex. Does it better than the guys on AEW. And he was going to go for that big splash, but Hansen had it scouted. Remember his finishes when he was a young, slim babyface in the early 70s. He would do a flying splash to a guy on the mat. He would do the fucking butt drop. He would do a variety of things when he could still count on his legs and his knees to hold up under it. And look at the size of those hands. So fuck. I mean, Stan Hansen's got some big fucking mitts, and it just looks like nothing. And you see there, he opened his fist just in the nick of time. Andre was careful. He knew he could hurt somebody bad just because of his size and his strength, and he always tried to make sure that he was in control of what he was doing. And here, boom, I heard the big boot, and is this it? Yes! Look at in Japan, the people don't fucking go crazy, right? At least they didn't in that era, but they went crazy over that one. But it's just a slam. It's not the end of the world. Andre's still capable of getting out of the way. He's still in this. But that right there was a shocking thing. They got replayed over and over and over, and Hansen was all the way up underneath him. Andre could get himself up there, but to fully stand and turn him, Hansen was a lot of man there. Stan Hansen told me, I can't remember the exact percentage, but he is in the class of 1/10 of 1% of the people in the world that has either 4 or 5 artificial body parts. And he was needing, when I talked to him a couple of years ago, he was needing work on his wrist because it looked like a wrist off of a space alien. He's got bone growths and things going on all over the place.
Look at how many photographers are at ringside.
Well, the Gong magazine and Weekly Pro Wrestling and all the newspapers. What was the big sports paper at the time in Japan?
Oh, I forget the name of it.
Baseball Sha.
Well, that was one of the magazines.
Oh, that was a magazine also. And then a lot of the sports papers covered wrestling. Because Weekly Pro was by the same company, the same printer that did, or publisher that did Shaw, and the baseball magazine also.
And actually, this is before the magazines really exploded, because it was in 83 when they went from monthly to weekly. They were still just monthly magazines with newspapers coming out at this point in 81. By 83.
Well, yeah, but now don't slough off the 70s Japanese magazines just because they were monthly. Well, now think about this, folks. They were square bound, like over 100 pages with dozens of pages of color. The magazines. Okay, look, we're kicking it up here. So the Japanese magazines in the 70s were the most well-done wrestling magazines on earth. And now look, it's completely broken down. And photographer, get out of our fucking way. This is television.
And for anyone who notices Arnold Skolin there, after Andre had his falling out with Frank Valois, it was Arnold Skolin that would escort him on various tours.
That's right. Arnold right there in the suit, right in between him on the other side of the ring, in between the ring and the post and the turnbuckles there, and the weird turnbuckle pads that Inoki had, that style. They just got counted out, by the way, and they're going to restart this here in a minute. But they fought outside the ring. They were counted out. Hansen don't want to stop. Andre don't want to stop. You mentioned Skolin. There he comes. Arnold was one of the most trusted confidants that Vince Sr. had and later that Vince Jr. had. And if Andre was going to go someplace, high profile, big match out of the country or whatever, especially in this environment, Arnold would go as well. Arnold was the bag man that brought the cash back from the box office after shows. Arnold was the guy that guarded everything with his life. Arnold was a guy that played poker with Gorilla Monsoon and Phil Zacco in the old, office in New York. He went so far back with him. He was one of the most trusted guys in the company. So now we're going to get this thing going again. I think, who was it? Is that ain't Shinma, is it? Or is it?
I think that may be Shinma.
It may be Shinma. With the promoter is going to allow this match to go on because remember, this is Japan, so they can't just make matches on their own.
Well, he's the promoter like Francis Fleischer was the promoter.
Well, yeah, right? But I mean for the fans.
Yeah.
They don't just do this shit willy-nilly. And now the referee's asking if both men agree for it, and this is the rules it's going to be, and et cetera, et cetera. I encourage everybody to watch this and look at the crowd. And this was the laid-back, Japanese audience. Watch this with the sound up also so you can hear not only the fans reacting, but also Andre's bellows can be heard in that deep voice through this whole thing. And now an arm dragging, Andre. Now, the spot with the referee falling was fucking classic. I remember that from the first time I saw this 39 fucking years ago. I have not watched this in years. This is another match I used to put on training tapes, though. Andre doing I got my arms wrapped up. He perfected the arm tie-up so that he could be in jeopardy, either as a babyface with the heel beating on him or as a heel taking a bump and getting a pop from the people and getting out of it quicker. And now he's like, okay, motherfucker. And boom, if you watch those, he's so good with it. He opens his fist right before it lands, but you never see it. And the momentum coming from it, it just looks scary. Now he's going back for some more heat on fucking Hansen. This has already lasted, what, twice as long as the average Andre match, and he's taken more bumps than you'd see in the previous 10. I wish he was still... a lot of people don't remember up until, what, mid-70s when Vince Sr. really told him just cut it out. He would throw drop kicks in his matches and some of the comebacks. Look at that. Talk about a timber bump.
That was great.
And he had pulled the padding off the turnbuckle to do Hansen, but Hansen got him, and he was able to sell that because that's the whole idea. It's metal, even a giant. Now look, Hansen goes drop the elbow, and fucking Andre catches him in a top wrist lock. And Andre's hands are almost as long as wide as Hansen's forearms are long. This is a competitive match that probably Andre was happy to have it too at this point, because he was not able to have tons of competitive matches in those days. And this is what this shot is really insane. Look at the size difference. You know Hansen's huge. And then you've got that fucking monster behind him. And the fucking head and the head butts and just the way they're working this. It was fucking gorgeous.
It's a shame that when we finally got heel Andre in America in the World Wrestling Federation, he was so broken down, because you look at him here, he's dynamic.
And here, this was 1981. He was not in his best. He wasn't in the shape he was in 5 years beforehand. But he could still do it. It wasn't really until the national expansion that it just happened to go at the send. Look at him easily with Hansen. 84 happened to coincide with the time that there's that old splash he used to use in Montreal. It coincided with the time that his body it started breaking worse. At that point, he was past 40. Wasn't he? Was he born in what, 44, I think? Or 40? Oh, God. Help me out. 44, 46. Somewhere like the point is, when he got 40, that was it. But the lariat. The first time I saw Stan Hansen was on a Japanese tape when they had first brought him in, just months before this, and he was shooting off the young guys, the young boys, and hitting them with these lariats that I was like, goddamn, either they just don't give a fuck over there, because I wasn't in the business yet. I said, either they just don't give a fuck, or he's really a fucking nut. Because Hansen would knock those fucking guys out to get over. So he lariats fucking Andre out of the ring. Andre puts on an elbow sleeve. Look at Hansen now. Wait a minute. What the fuck? Skolin just slipped him the fucking sleeve. Now Andre's going to try to do a fucking lariat. This is some wild ass shit for the time and for, Andre being involved. And I think, yeah, there goes the referee. Boom. He's done. And that was way not as hard as Hansen was hitting the referees at that point in time. We may get a little of that later on in this match, I think, as a matter of fact, as I recall. All the young boys getting in, trying to clear the referee out. Nobody wants to fuck with the monsters. Another one of the referees, he's calling for the bell. We got to disqualify this thing again. This is the way that, even though they went to all clean finishes in Japan, because they did nothing but double countouts or disqualifications in main events for so many years, they wanted to protect everybody. That didn't work, but this kind of shit worked. Because this was special. These guys, you didn't want to see anybody get beat. And you wanted to see all this chaos. And Hansen, besides being almost legally blind, did not give a fuck when he was going to fucking get over. He was going to fucking hit some people. And nobody wants to fucking try to hold on to Andre, although he was probably not as stiff a stance as Hansen was in this environment. And basically, this is the way we're closing in on the end of it. I guess we won't get to see any of those good Hansen lariats on some of the young boys, but this was the way that they built their guys, their talent, so that every time these guys came over on a tour, there was a chance that they would collide and conflict, and you would remember shit like this. And eventually somebody would win out in the end, and then they'd go off and do something else. But it didn't have to always be a fucking clean win and a handshake. Even in a sports-based presentation, you got to have the fucking crazy men. And Stan Hansen, for almost 20 minutes, standing up to Andre the Giant this physically in that environment and on television back when it was on the network over there, that made Hansen a fucking star in Japan. He was already big, but this was another level. Wasn't hard to see Andre leaving the building, was it?
No, and unlike a lot of other guys, the fans stay right out of his way.
Yeah.
They're not getting anywhere near him there.
Yeah, they always wanted to get involved and tap somebody on the back. They gave Andre plenty of room. But do you think for people who, I know we have a lot of educated wrestling fans who probably knew a lot of the things that we said here and have seen some of the old footage, but for a lot of people, that was a surprise from what they think of Andre, that this was what he was capable of when he had the opportunity.
Yeah, I think anyone who only knows him from what he did in America needs to watch a match like this, or some of the matches he had in New Japan in the early 80s. Even some of the stuff in the 70s where he was more agile, where he did drop kicks, where he came off the top rope. But he was also thinner there and skinnier there.
Yeah.
But here in the early 80s, heel Andre in Japan, I love watching this stuff. And I've got a massive collection of Japanese magazines from that era. And I brought up the photographers earlier. The photos are incredible.
Oh,
and there's
my
so
God.
many great photos of Andre amongst everyone else in those magazines.
I was so jealous because my pictures didn't look, but they had the best. Not only do the Japanese photographers have the absolute best equipment, but also because here's something I learned from being a photographer. So many of their shows were taped for television or for the network back then because, both shows were on the networks over there. The lighting in the buildings was incredible. So the photographers could use high-speed film with no flash and still have great ability to stop the action, high shutter speeds and no blur. And it was a whole different. And when I got my pictures in the Japanese magazines, that's where I felt in wrestling. When I first started getting my stuff printed in the Japanese magazines, I felt like I was a job guy because my shit looked pretty good over here, but over there, I was in the fucking weeds. It looked okay because I was shooting people that they wanted to fucking read about in Japan. That's probably the only reason it wasn't the quality of my photography, because those guys were at a whole nother level.
Well, like you said, all of your photos were in a dark room, and everything they shot was illuminated.
We had one ring light with like fucking 300-watt fucking spotlights at the Louisville Gardens, But anyway, there you have it. In honor of Andre the Giant, we talked about the shoot with Akira Maeda that happened 5 years after if Maeda had got froggy with 1981 Andre, that would have been a different story as we saw. But we talked about that on The Experience last week. We talked about shoots. This watch along this coming Thursday on The Experience. Among other things, we'll talk to Bertrand Hebert about the Andre the Giant biography that he and Pat LaPrade wrote. So it's Andre week. Andre the Giant has a posse.
That's my impression of late 80s Andre, everything he did in the ring. Well, with that said,
what? I'm going to tell one story real quick about the other Giant. Plowboy Frazier. Plowboy Frazier was legitimately probably the same height as Andre, and everybody says, was it 6'10" or 6'11"? He was 7 feet if he had his afro. Well, Plowboy didn't have that much hair, but he was 6'10", and he was every bit of 420, 425, but it was all in his stomach. And he always wanted to run with Andre, but because Frazier, besides the fact that he wasn't that good in the ring and he had issues with some people with his personality, he didn't get a run with Andre except a couple of times he was in the ring with Andre in Tennessee, and Andre didn't give him shit. Andre did not work with him in any way like he worked with Stan Hansen, and Frazier was 100 pounds heavier and, 5 inches taller. But Frazier would do that same noise, like all the Giants do when he would do his big leg drop, because that's the one thing Frazier could do. He was a big fat sack of shit, but he could do a heck of a leg drop, especially in his younger days, where he would get way up off the mat, right? And it was he gave me 2 of them one time at a spot show, and it was a terrifying thing to be laying under, but he was good with it. But anyway, one night in Memphis, it was toward the latter years of his career, and he was heavier and he was slower, and the ring in Memphis was kind of bouncy anyway. And he slammed the baby face, and he went to drop that big leg, and whenever he would, he'd kind of take a step back, and then he'd go and take a step forward and kick the big right leg out and drop. Well, he took that step back, and he went and he kicked his right leg up, but the ring bounced underneath him. He got fucking flummoxed, whatever the fuck happened. He went and just fell straight backwards. Threw his right leg up in the air and fell straight on his back. Boom. And the guy laying there for the leg drop went, what the fuck just happened? Anyway, you never know about these giants. Brian, it's your show. Close it up.
Well, we will have more songs next week, but until then, the drive-thru has closed. All right.
Hey,
I gotta say, this may be the best batch of songs we've ever played on one episode. Like, not one of them I could really complain about. Great job. Everyone, great job who's been sending in songs.
who says we're never positive?
Let's end on a positive note. The Jim Cornette Experience debuts Friday, wherever you find your favorite podcast, this week with Bertrand DeBear about the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant, and of course, the drive-thru again next Monday, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Get access to classic episodes of the drive-thru and the experience by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Cornette.
Or you can actually become a Patreon at patron.com.
What did I say?
You wanted to do it that way.
What did I say? I don't even know what I said.
You said it right. I've said it wrong.
Okay.
I'm fucking with you.
Well, listen, you could fuck with us for $5 a month and get access to the archives of the drive-thru and the experience.
And you're going to get a $5 fucking.
With new episodes or more classic episodes added each and every Sunday evening, patreon.com/Cornette. You can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com. Go see what's up at JimCornette.com. The drive-thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen at newlawoffice.com. But until Friday on The Experience and Monday right back here on the drive-thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!